you go. There you go. So the link, of course, will go up on an how do you say, an unsearchable YouTube link, and I'll send you out the link afterwards, and I'll take it down if at any time you want me to take it down. So again, welcome to this class on learning design. The primary objective of today's workshop is going to be to help you walk away with something that you're already familiar with, I'm certain, which is a certain methodology around designing training. Now, what I'm hoping that you will find built into this workshop, and it's as dynamic and as engaging as the one that we did on facilitation, what I'm hoping that you'll walk away with is, again, 3 or 4 small pieces that you might say to yourself, okay, I'm going to try something different as I move forward. Every company, every customer, every business partner that I deliver this to has a different work training culture, a different paradigm, and sometimes we're addressing pieces of this where you say, look, we just can't implement it in our organization. So these are great opportunities for us to hold discussions as a team and see, well, can anybody, provide additional ideas on how we can address different training needs or different training paradigms or issues or things like that. So as with the previous courses, I'm going to ask you to, keep your hand up and intervene as often as possible. But I will jump the first few slides because we've already been through a lot of that stuff. So a little bit more formally, these are the objectives of today's workshop. First of all, we're going to talk about the perspective and the mindset of instructional design. And to be able to do that really, really, really solidly, the first 45 minutes or so, nearly the first hour, is going to be a lot more theoretical. We're really going to talk about how the mind works, and it's going to set the foundation to be able to understand why we read certain books on training and development, why certain authors that have done a lot of research are more popular than others, because they've really anchored the way that the human mind works for learning. We're going to look at some of these theories, very, very high level, but it'll be about the first 45 minutes. And then we'll start to understand why, as an instructional designer, which we all are, even if we don't all necessarily have a degree, if we're all working in training and development, we are all instructional designers, right? And we're gonna look at this process together. We will look at, well, this is what I just said, looking at theory basics, but we're really going to take it into the next step. And we're going to start to look at how do we design for adults. This is the target audience that we have. If we had a customer that was, I don't know, K to 12, or say young children in the ages of 6 to 9 that came to us and said, can you design a learning program? I personally would not be able to do that. My specialty is not children learning, it's adult learning. And there are differences in the way we learn. And the very first thing that I'm sure that anybody who has children, the very first thing we say to children is, you don't need to know why, just do it. Adults is completely the different side. You need to know why, and I'm going to help you know why. I'm going to help you understand why you need to know it. So, of course, there will be 2 or 3 bio breaks throughout the session. They're a little bit more than 5 minutes. So we'll have time to get back to our, our emails and things like that. I'm going to skip the ground rules, which I think we're all familiar with already. I'm just going to remind everyone that when you see one of these symbols on screen, it's because there's an interaction. And of course, when you see this, it means there's usually a key message that you might want to be keeping in the back of your mind. And again, you will see me use the words training, meeting, workshop, virtual class. All of this basically boils down to a learning event of some kind. And a learning event could be as simple as actually just, preparing a meeting. When you've got a meeting, a 1-hour meeting that you're trying to organize and you're building the agenda, you want people to walk away. You want them to remember what the discussion was. You want them to be able to understand what your message was, and you want them to be able to apply it back on the job. So whether it's a meeting or training or something like this, what we're looking for is how do we take information and start to structure it so that it moves from information towards learning. So does anybody have their notes from the facilitation class ready at hand? All right, so you're not allowed to look at them, all right? So Pam, you're going to be the unfortunate selected one today because everybody here has seen the next slide already in the previous one. So I'm going to reach out to you directly. And there's a few key takeaway words. You should recognize this slide for the most part. The very first one is, of course, context. Then we have relevance, and then we have interactivity. So I'm going to remind everybody that at any time, if I reach out to you directly, you are allowed to a helpline, and you're allowed to bounce the question back to one of your colleagues. That way, I don't have to be responsible for doing that. So I'm going to ask you, Pam. Now, this question is in the context of training and development, learning. What does it mean when we talk about, you're building a training program and you want to add context to it? What does that mean? To the content that you're designing, it has to have context.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, that means that you want to situate the learner in the position that they're in order to absorb, the information that they're going to be given. It could mean very different things depending on the context. It could mean sitting in an office, so environmental factors. It can mean setting up information ahead of time, explaining, I don't know, the context of their role and how they're learning this and how it applies to them.
Yeah, you got it straight on. You answered the very quick question. Why are you here? Okay, now it's dumbed down, or it's simplified in this sense, because what we will be looking at today in the second hour, I believe, is adult learning principles. What you're trying to take away, these very three simple words, are the piece where you say, if you just bring more of this into anything that you are designing, you will increase retention, which is the very, very first piece of Bloom's taxonomy. I want to remember. Then it moves into understanding, then it moves into application, up to creativity. But I just want people to remember what they're learning. This, by adding a little bit of these three these three notions into your training, you will do that, because adults want to know context, they need to know relevance, and the interactivity aspect of it will enhance that as well. So you hit it dead on. Why I'm here. Who knows, who remembers what relevance is?
Why do I need to know it?
Why do I need to know this?
Yeah.
What's in it for me? Yeah.
How will I use it? What's in it for me, basically? Yes. So can anybody give you an example of context and relevance if you formulate that into one sentence? In your training, you're on slide 27 of your training, and you say, oh yeah, I got to put a little bit more context and relevance into the information that I'm providing here to move it from information to learning. Can anybody give me a sentence in context of your enterprise?
Would it be at the end of this training, you will be able to?
Yes, I was thinking more when you're writing the learning objectives. Absolutely. That's fundamental is understanding not so much the learning objectives, and we will actually be looking at learning objectives on how to cut up a learning objective based on the three primary ways to make sure that they're how do you say, measurable. But if you're halfway into the training, sometimes that's where we forget to come back to these three fundamental words. At the beginning and sometimes at the end, especially at the end, you're going to say, during this class, you should have learned about blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay. Well, what I want to know is you need to tell me while I'm learning. You need to remind me as an adult why I'm here and how I'm going to be using what you're showing to me. Does anybody have an example? Susanna, you look like you just got it on the...
Well, it's like anything. So I don't know, take for example, I don't know, they're learning a new system or something like that. Obviously reiterate, it's a new system. That's why we're here. It links to this business objective. You need to know how to do this because for this and this a reason in your everyday job.
Exactly. It's exactly that. It's as simple as that. But we tend to forget it when we're writing content. It could be something as simple as, oh, and by the way, remember, we're showing this piece to you because you're going to be using this new rule back in the store when you're addressing, customer Y. And you're going to be using this because as you learn more about this content, you'll be able to adapt it from season to season, for example. I'm thinking back to a training that we did with Sports Expert. And the training was about, in the spring and in the summer, already starting to recognize physical morphology to be able to start to address people's needs into the winter. So people would come into the fall and they would already be like, yeah, you look like you might be interested in the new, winter things that are coming out in a couple of weeks from now. And the idea was to keep drawing the customer back in to start already to expose them to the new, the new clothes that were coming in. So context and relevance is something that you want to be bringing in all the time. Every little piece of information that you think is either going to be harder to retain or is going to be more relevant, more important for them to apply back on the job, you want to remind people why they're doing it. You know, relevance will be even more important as you move into the content and context will, because they will have understood by now. But that tie back into, by the way, remember, you're going to be doing this at step 4. You know, make sure that you remember at step 4 to apply what you're learning here, because this is where it's going to be the most critical. You know, that sort of callback to that. And of course, interactivity, well, it's all a question of how you're engaged with the content. Now, this particular workshop is not specific to e-learning. You know, this has to do with all forms of learning. So whether you're interacting back, you know, on location, on the job, in class, virtually, and all of that, how do you get people to be engaged with the content? And I'm going to, you know, I'll ask Leslie, for example. So if you give me 3 ideas of how you can interact with content, give me one on the job, in class, and online, like we're doing now in a live workshop.
So online, it would be certainly different screens, different, you know, interactivities with the user so that you're continuing to engage them, changing up the format. Doing also what we're doing right now, you're engaging me, Eduardo, in terms of, you know, making sure that, you know, the concept is there so it's engaging. And then certainly I think just, again, making sure that the messages are meaningful and short and tight.
Exactly right. So making sure our interactivity could be the discussions that we have together, could be asking you to write stuff on screen. You could, in e-learning, it could be a solution that you're trying to, you know, figure out. It could be a case study. There's a whole bunch of ways, but the fact that we want to actually manipulate content, the learning content in some way, is what, again, and we will be referring back to Bloom's taxonomy, and I will show it to you in maybe 20 slides from now. Has everybody heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Show of hands.
You shared that last.
Okay, so about half of the people have, and that's fine. It is what is used fundamentally to think about when you are designing training, what level do you want to bring your learners to? And we're going to talk a little about that, because sometimes we're under the impression that certain forms and certain delivery methods of training can go higher than they can actually do for several reasons. And we'll look at that a little bit later on. So again, be attentive to these during the workshops. If you have any during this workshop, if you have any questions, or what I'm saying is, see if you can note down during the workshop 5 or 6 takeaways that, you know, at one point it resonates with you. And so, every now and then I see somebody put their head down and write something. And I like that. So maybe at the midway or at the end of the workshop, you can say, well, what were the 5 or 6, you know, sort of things that resonated well enough with you? And we'll share that, because that will be a great way to sort of segue into the next step of applying what you've learned today. Are there any questions before I move forward? Right on. Okay, so we're going to talk about the instructional design mindset. And to do that, I think I might have a typo on my next screen. I apologize for that. Basically what I want to, I didn't realize that I screwed up over here. Okay, but basically what I would like you to do is just be sure that you can interact with Zoom once again. So what I'm going to ask you to do is go to the top of your screen. You should have a button called View Options. Click on Annotate, and then grab the text, okay? And from there, I think I forgot to even remove this, didn't I? Can I? Ah, darn. Okay, so sorry about that. I added this animation in this morning and I forgot to remove it, but it doesn't really matter. It's just see if you can answer the question that's there. What's the fundamental, not a super long sentence, fundamental difference between information and training? And information as a reference point, I think we talked about this a little bit during the facilitation class. You're going over Champlain, well, not so much Champlain, but let's say you're going over Jacques-Cartier Bridge or some place, you know, in your hometown, and you see a sign for a McDonald's burrito. That's information. So what's the difference between that information and the class that you're taking today, the workshop you're taking today? Fundamental, 1 or 2 words. You can also use the actual text screen, the text button. Okay.
See those options.
Okay, maybe one more answer or 2. You think about it.
Eduardo, for some reason my annotation didn't work. I put it in the chat, but I
Oh.
had this happen last time again, and I'm not sure. And I did upload the newest app, so I'm not sure why it doesn't work for me to have that.
Okay, well, I see it here,
Yeah.
teaching,
Yeah.
connecting, understand, okay. I don't know, I'm not sure why, it might be something locally.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
This is why we use the screen, so I'll leave my chat open on my right, so if there's any.
Okay, no worries. Sorry about that.
Not at all.
And mine's not working either. So
Okay. So if you want to type in the chat at any time as well, that'll work just as fine. So I'm going to choose, I don't know who has done this, and I'm not expecting the person who wrote it to put up their hand or anything, but I want some commentary on just one of these, and then we'll move forward. It's somebody who wrote down, it's how to do something. Can somebody give me an example where you could actually use the it's how to do something as information and not training? If I buy something at IKEA, everybody has heard of IKEA, right? Okay, so it gives an instruction book on how to do it. After I've built my chest, and it's taken me 2 hours to build it, I burn that booklet, and God forbid the chest would fall apart again, because I'd probably be able to do it, but oh my God, you know, which one, what side was it? There's a little lip over here. Is it going the left, the right? And I don't know if you're like me, but I always have to take one piece off that I made a mistake on. You know, and I usually catch it pretty soon, thankfully, but I was like, damn, I didn't realize there was this little nick over here that goes on this side of, okay. What's the difference again between this recipe? Again, you can open up a recipe book and it's showing you how to make a risotto, but after you walk away, you're not going to necessarily, oh yeah, I forgot to put the bacon. I got to put the bacon in at step 3. What's the difference between that recipe on how to do something and training?
You're doing one on your own, whereas the other one, someone's training you to do it, someone's teaching you how to do it, you're doing it together.
Well, e-learning is you're pretty much on your own, right? Shelley? I can't hear you, I apologize. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, I'll come back to you in a moment once your audio. Florence, you had your hand up as well. Can't hear you either. Can everybody hear? Is anybody hearing them?
No.
Okay.
No.
I can't.
No, I'm not hearing them.
You want to try again, Florence? Because I just heard a little bit of your sound come in, then it went off. Can't hear you either. Shelley, has it worked out? No? Well, that's unfortunate. Information. Okay, so Shelley, you wrote information is downloaded, training you can check for understanding. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Did somebody want to say something?
Eduardo, I was just going to jump in and say, if to your risotto example, if I'm learning how to make risotto, it's more informational, it's discovery, versus if I'm attending a cooking class where I'm there to be trained on the proper technique to make a risotto, versus just it's a nice Sunday afternoon.
Yes.
Event.
And you're adding to what Shelley said as well. The fundamental difference, is not even so much the way the content is being presented, but if I'm expecting you to learn something, I need to vet if you have learned it. Otherwise, it's just information that I'm providing to you. So this is why recipe books exist, and this is why we all have our little checkbooks on what to do, because we don't not expected to remember everything. But I need to make sure that I've understood. If I'm the instructional designer building this, if I see that 99-cent burrito, you know, McDonald's doesn't really care if I remember it or not, and they're hoping that it's going to be an increase because you're seeing it at 6:30 in the morning on the way to work, and you haven't had time to eat and whatever. But training, I want to be able to be sure that it is measurable. And this is why when you are, and we're going to look at this again a little bit later, we're just sort of introducing the topic, and I wanted to see if you could interact here. But the big chunk about the difference between training and information is the ability to write learning objectives that are measurable, and actually making sure that you're matching those learning objectives to be measurable throughout the training. So training gives you info. I'm sorry, yes, somebody, you wanted to say something?
I'm just wondering, would you say that information is typically one way, training should be 2 ways? Because there's an interaction and you want to validate?
The fact that you said should be 2 ways, yes, I would say that training should be 2 ways, because you, in the sense that you want to be interacting with that content to be able to take it up a notch.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of training doesn't go there, right? I dump information, I do a quick exam at the end, checkbox, done, and that's it. Are we interacting with the content? Now, is it training by virtue of it being, how do you say, evaluated? You would say, yes, it is, but I'm not vetting if I've managed to bring the person there so that there's retention afterwards. So I can do an exam or a smiley sheet or any of these things right after training and then say, oh, a week later, I've forgotten it, right? And we saw, and I'm sorry, Shelley, I'll come to you in just a moment. We talked about this a little bit the last time. We know fundamentally that training tends to only, poorly built training only tends to be retained for about 5%, 10%, and for a short period of time. And yet, oftentimes we just keep doing it that way, saying to ourselves, we've checked off the box, we've done the training, but there's no impact. And when you want to go in, again, Bloom's taxonomy, go up into application and impact and so forth and so on, and alignment with the business objectives and all of that, and you say, how come we keep training people and yet there's been very little increase? Well, because your training is poorly built to match what the adults need to actually be able to learn. Yes, go ahead, Shelley. I'm sorry, I still can't hear you. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to move on. I'm just going to clear the annotation thing here. There you go. Okay. Just for the fun of it, I've put on screen some of the basic theory. When we talk about instructional design, if anybody has been through the degree at one of the universities, this is probably about, I would say, 30% of the content that we need to read through to be able to start to get an idea around sort of the great leaders of how to think about learning in general, So let me just take this off. Got my annotation on. There you go. So on screen, you've seen a few of them that you might have heard before. Kolb, Dewey, Piaget, Vygotsky, Brunner, Bloom, which we'll talk about a little bit later, Skinner. It goes into constructivism, into learning styles, experiential learning, so forth and so on. We're not going to go through all of that today, but this is how far learning has gone. The wish to understand how learning happens has gone this far. Now, as a result of, I've read probably over 150 books on learning. What I wanted to suggest to you today is, I'm going to bring up just a few of them for you to note down. And if you haven't read these books before, I strongly suggest you find time. And these are easy to read books. They're not difficult and they're not very big. So this is the fundamental one that I would suggest to everybody if you've never seen it before. I think I brought it up the last time. It is a very, I think I have it here. Do I have it here? Oh, I have it somewhere here. Anyway, it's a very, very, very easy book to read. It's super small. There's, 150 pages, 160 pages. Sorry, could you say that? There you go. The idea here is exactly what we were talking about, is to start to move your frame of mind from the difference between information and training. This will set a very, very simple, easy foundation for that. I know you already know most of it, but sometimes, we grab a little piece out of there. We say, maybe I could bring this into what I'm doing. The second one is Kirkpatrick, which probably everybody's heard of as well. This is, again, the fundamental to the 4 levels of training evaluation, right? So again, there it's reaction, understanding, application, impact, and all of that stuff. Kirkpatrick this is sort of the foundation to evaluating training. It'll go from your smiley sheet right up to the next 4 levels. There's a 5th level that has been added to this, which is the ROI, which was not designed by Kirkpatrick, but rather by Jack Phillips. And we could talk about that if you want to think about performance. We can look at that a little bit later on. But this course is mostly based on training, not so much on ROI. But these are sort of 2 fundamental books. There are 3 others that I'm going to bring up right here. So if you go through these 2 and then you say, I want to go a little bit further, this is sort of an interesting one. Performance Focused Smile Sheets. It was published about 6-7 months ago by Will Thalheimer. I would suggest you connect with him on LinkedIn if you're not connected. He's a very, very, very good author. And because most organizations never really go above that level 1, which is called reaction, what's the reaction to my training? This will help you go deeper into just that level 1, what we call the smiley sheet, right? Or the smile sheet. How did you like the course right after, This will help you go a little bit deeper into thinking about how to design just for that level 1 reaction, and possibly implement some actual action items for the learners to take forward with them. The other two, well, beyond learning objectives and of course, training and performance is the follow-up to training and telling and training. Training and performance is when you start to really think about aligning training to business objectives, performance, and start to say to yourself, well, what is the impact of this training? You might say, well, by delivering this training, I'd like there to be a 25% increase in sales. Well, how do you think about that 25% increase in sales? And this book won't take you through that entire process, but it'll help you understand what your jobs are, what your responsibilities are towards your learners, in terms of saying, well, do they have what they need to be able to get there? Are the resources available? Are they getting the right feedback? What's their motivation to do it, and things like that. So those are like 2 really fun books to read. All right. Any questions before I move forward? Okay. Has everybody heard about Addie and Sam? Anybody hear about that? Hands up. Okay. So as an instructional designer, what we do is we will design for learning experiences. You've probably heard the expression learning experience designer instead of an instructional designer. So that was a buzzword that came around about 5 years ago. And the question we ask ourselves is, how does an instructional designer think? Because it is a methodology. Now this methodology, you adapt it, you build it, you transform it in ways that make sense for your organization. But there are more than 2. There are a whole bunch of different ones. I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. The very first one that is sort of the theoretical model around instructional design is called Addie. The SAM model, which we'll get to others, is actually the one you are probably implementing the most often. So just briefly, the idea of Addie is that we're going to go through this process, and we're actually going to look at all of these steps today. Less of implementation, because that happens more on your side, but we'll talk about evaluation certainly. But the 3 fundamental pieces are analyzing, the analysis phase. So before I'm getting into designing my content, did I do a proper analysis? Maybe I could just get a show of hands by maybe 1 or 2 people. What would be a fundamental question to ask yourself before you're starting to build the training in the analysis phase? You sit down and somebody comes to you and say, I would like you to build me training on this. What would be one question that you should ask yourself in that analysis phase before you even see the content? You just know what the topic is.
What is the real need?
Yeah, so why we're doing this, that's right at the top. Why is actually, how should I put it? It's the fundamental question in this case, because why will answer the question, how does it align with the business? So that's absolutely accurate. And that is the first question you ask. Why am I really doing this? Pam, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'd say, can training solve this problem?
Is it a training problem that I have? That again brings us back to performance. That's a great one, because when you look at performance, and we'll briefly look at a slide a little bit later on, you realize that over 80% of the time, it's not a performance issue. It can be solved by putting training somewhere else, but it's maybe not on the learner's back that we want to put this. But let's go a little bit further into the content itself. You want to think about designing the content. I'll stop the share for a second. I want to think about designing the content. Leslie, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we often think about what behaviors or performance behaviors we need to improve upon. I think within operations, that's certainly a question that we ask ourselves in the analysis. What's missing, in terms of team performance or actions that we can build into our training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's basically tying it back in to be sure that it aligns once again with the business. And are those performance objectives reasonable? Are the KPIs reasonable, and so forth? Absolutely.
I feel like who the target audience is, because it would be different, right?
So now we're bringing it down a little bit. Thank you, Christy. So what do you mean by who the target audience is?
Well, I mean, it depends on what the training content is and who you're targeting. So for example, if I'm doing a sales floor leadership training, I need to ensure that my target, I'm gearing my content and to say management, for example, versus a
Yes.
fashion associate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So assuming different learning, I won't go into learning styles just yet, but certainly different ways perhaps, or different treating the content differently from one side to the other. Had I asked this question during the facilitation class? If I think about healthcare professionals when they learn, you're thinking about I did ask it, okay? So if
Yes.
whoever remembers the answer to this, I'm gonna ask you not to provide it. So anybody that doesn't, otherwise, Pam, you're gonna be the you're gonna be the chosen one again. When do healthcare professionals, when is the best time for them to learn? Just a best guess. Anybody can give that. And remember, Pam, you can defer the question to anybody you want.
I would say on the job.
Okay, so work during the workday, right? Anybody else?
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, on the job, someplace between 7 and 6:30 p.m., give or take.
Sure.
That's pretty much what.
Or simulation, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, who has the answer and why?
I guess last time you said it's very early in the morning. That's because I guess they have control over their time
Right.
at that moment. So I don't remember if it was 5:30 till 7 or if it was, but anyway, I just remember very early in the morning.
Okay, it's actually very late
I
at night.
thought, I was just gonna say, I thought it was
Very
late at
late.
night,
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, so it's like 9 o'clock. And so if during my analysis and somebody says, we want to build training because there's a new product coming out and it's going to talk about diabetes, blah, 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 blah. And the first thing I'm going to ask myself is what time are they going to learn? Where are they going to learn it? What technology? I mean, everything you guys have said is absolutely right. But I want to think about in that analysis, the why. Everything you've mentioned answers the question why, but what about the who? Who are these people, right? Christy, you touched on that a little bit. And not to be stereotypical, but if I'm training for a doctor at 9 o'clock at night, it's not going to be the same thing as I'm training, I don't know, a mechanic which we've done before. We've trained mechanics for UAP in these different companies, and it's a whole different ballgame. The language is different. You actually add swearing into the training practically, I mean, not so much swear words, but I mean, it's definitely not the same level of content, but that's the way they receive it. So I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but the idea is that when you are thinking about the analysis, this is the most important piece of what you're going to be doing. Do you know the learners? Do you know them? Why you're doing it? Which is the content you want to keep inside of there? How are you going to build it? Which technology? When are they going to be? Is it going to be on their phone? Are they going to be between tasks while they're doing it? If they're between tasks, and you say, well, you've got to do it this week. We know that you're busy. You can come back to the training at any time. Build it for that then. If you are allowing them to actually cut the training, which is what we typically do, LMSs are built to be able to, bookmark, right? And come back to the page where you left off. You got to think about that. If there's a likelihood that they're going to stop the training midway, build it so that the training can be stopped midway. Build it into sections and say, you know what, we understand that this is going to be taken during your workday. We suggest that if you need to cut the training into pieces, you finish one section and return to the next section on your next visit. Just to say you can come back at any time. Well, I'm sorry, there's a call. Down goes the training. I come back to page 7. I'm like, I don't remember what it is, and I move forward with that. So I'm losing the anchor of that content. And that's what the analysis is meant for. The rest of it, design development, is a little bit more straightforward because it's going to come from your analysis. Which technology, what are the colors, what's the branding, and all of that stuff. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, a little bit more in detail. What we are probably doing, and it's something that most of us would do, is we would actually implement SAM. So SAM it's called a successive approximation model. And the idea is that we are super agile. You basically will build a piece of the training, the first 6, 7, 8, 9 slides, get it vetted by whoever's part of the steering committee, even the learners. If you're fortunate enough to actually have a learner on board, say, you know what, I want you to do the review. We've done 9 slides, or before I even get to the slides, I've written the script, I've written whatever it is, and send it to them and get their feedback and then get it back. This way, the more delicate nature of the ADDIE model is to be sure. Now, Studio 7, we've developed a super iterative model, so we're not as worried about the way we work. But the risk otherwise is that you go out and you build your 90 slides, and then you deliver it, and people go, "Oh my God!" A, oh, my camera went out of focus there. A, it's too long. B, the content is too heavy. Why haven't you done this in 3 months, and so forth and so on? And you're getting all of this negative feedback. So the idea is, can you build it in such a way that you can get people vetting it sooner rather than later, piece by piece? Now, how would you say that internally you are building your training right now?
I feel we're doing that now for our operations at least.
You're doing the SAM model?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be typically more what we tend to implement, as I was saying, because ADDIE is a much longer process to do. Okay, let's try a case study. We're going to have a break coming up in about 15 minutes. Let's try a quick case study. We're going to go into breakout rooms. There are enough people for this. So I'm going to give you a moment to read what's on screen. Please raise your hand when you've read through it, okay? Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Florence. Robin, Audrey, thank you, Suzanne. Okay, so I think everybody's pretty much gone through it. The question is going to be this. You are trying to figure out, where does Emily start? She has been handed this design. She's been told, look, so we've got a classroom course on the code of, business ethics, professional ethics, whatever it is. And I want you to turn it into an online course. What I would like you to do is, with the very small introduction to ADDIE or to SAM that we have there, I just want you to break out into rooms and discuss for about 3 or 4 minutes, what would be the first few things? It's not to go all the way through to implementation. Just the first thing in that analysis side that you would be considering if you are given this this mandate, okay? Why don't I see my breakout rooms? Ah, here it is. So we'll create, how many people are we here? 14, okay, 3 rooms, that should be okay. We'll do an automatic assignment. I'll only give you 4 or 5 minutes. So we're not looking for, like I said, what are the first things you would do in the analysis portion? What do you want to determine up front in that analysis portion? Okay, I'll give you about 5 minutes.
Restart your.
Yeah, you go down to your mute. If you go down to your mute button.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Because I just realized when you break into the room, you have to join with the audio again too.
All right, so let's get started. Sorry, lots of red energy over here.
So the first question I would say is, like, who is this being delivered to?
What are the end goals or the objectives that we want them to understand or comprehend by the end of the training?
There's 100 slides. What are we gonna? How long is this?
Well, I was about to say, like, yeah, but the focus and select. I don't know. Do a selection of the topics that are priority at the moment, because for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I look at it too sometimes with the code of, like, even our own code of conduct. If I think about it, there's certain things in the code of conduct that would pertain to people that would be buyers, more so than a sales associate, more so than someone else. So, I mean, part of me even says, is it one training for everybody, or do you deliver different ones based on who the learner is? And then you can break down the slides. Oh. We lost you, Florence. It looks like you're on mute.
Still can't hear
Oh,
you.
there you go. Oh, no.
Sorry.
Years of all of us using Zoom and Teams, you think we'd have it all figured out by now. Yet I'm still the person who always joins meetings and starts talking while I'm on mute.
Okay, so who's our audience? What are our end goals and objectives? Determine if it's targeted or what the
Length.
priority topics are.
The length of the training, like how long we want it to be. And I'd say, when are we expecting them to do it? Is it something they're doing like at home? And they might be doing it on, like, not on the iPad in store, or are they doing it as part of their daily routine in the office as part of their work day?
Did anyone, the notes that it had, it said the screens are loaded. Did anyone understand what that meant? I didn't understand that.
I took it as being there was a heck of a lot of information on every single slide.
Oh, okay.
So you would have to sort of make things a little bit more succinct and maybe some interaction.
So you're not actually biting and you're fake chewing, but the nugget at the end, I don't know if that's nugget or tongue. Entire thing was thought out to get people to talk about it. No. Don't think I very Kardashian thing to do. No, really impacting on her part, I must say. Well, obviously people do. I know. People do. Watch this. Okay. Look what really is. I got a handle on it. There's no bite out of that burger. No. There's no bite out of the taco. There's no bite out of the meatball. But what is the nuggets?
Anybody else have anything to add?
It's not even, if you were just tuning in right now, I didn't know what you were talking about.
The delivery method, I know we talked about when we, like where and how they would do it, but the different types of delivery methods.
I guess some people are in the main room. Okay.
Seems that somebody has maybe their phone going at the same time. Is somebody using their phone at the same time they're using their... Is anybody running on their phone? Hello? Okay, I think that's better. I was actually getting the discussion. I think it was Shelley with somebody else, maybe Florence. I could hear your discussion even though we're in breakout rooms for some reason.
You're echoing.
Am I still echoing? Okay, let me just... Hello, am I still echoing?
Yes.
Yes.
It's very funny, but everybody else seems to be echoing. Well, it's as if we have somebody running on their phone simultaneously.
I'm running on my phone, Eduardo, but I've been running the entire session.
Yeah, it's just so we're getting the feedback from one speaker, somebody's speakers feedbacking back into their camera. Is that better? I'm not hearing an echo anymore. Are you still hearing an echo?
I don't hear it anymore.
Okay.
I don't hear it either.
Oh, well, there you go. So
No.
the case study was essentially you are mandated to do a transformation of an ILT, so an in-class training, to an online. What are, if there's one or two, if there's one person from each group that wants to proffer, and then we can comment as a team. So what would you say the top 3 things that came out of your discussion that you should be thinking about first during the analysis phase? Anybody?
We were in group 1.
Yeah.
With Leslie and Archie, and I'd say we categorized it into 3 different buckets, I'd say. So one is, asking what the goal of the training is, right? So what does the learner need to do or say in order for us to know that they have adopted, whatever that we're trying to impart on them?
Yes.
And then going down to the audience level. So who's the audience? We're going from in-class training to online training. So what tools do they need in order to have that, to do the training? Where are they taking the training? Who is the audience? How do they learn? What are their characteristics? And then time frame of the training. I mean, we have 100 slides. Does this need to be broken down into different, again, buckets? How do we do that? Ruth, I don't know if you want to add anything, but that was our.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that too, we just talked about, tailoring it. Is it the online training going to the entire audience, or are we going to be slicing it up at all to the audience?
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, and that's spot on. Those are excellent responses. Those are definitely part of your analysis. Just out of curiosity, do you do that currently?
I'd love to know the answer to that too.
Anybody from group number 2? Your responses are any additional or different responses from what Pam said to us?
The budget. What's the budget?
What's the budget?
Which will answer a lot of those questions, timing, everything else that goes with it.
Yeah. Anything else from group 3 that would be different from those responses? Okay, I heard during that, for some reason, I was getting the audio of, I think it was Shelley's group. There was actually something that came up at the very end of that discussion and there was a bit of a clue on what I was broadcasting. So I'm actually going to bring it back up on screen here for a second. So everything you said is absolutely correct, but as an instructional designer, there's sort of something inside of this quick case study that would be the very first thing at the top of yours of us at Studio 7. The very first thing we would look at and say, ooh, what would that be? And all of the other questions, like I said, are 100% valid. Again, what Julie said at the onset, why are we doing this? And then you just go down business alignment into the learners, into what is here that is just
100 screens, 100 screens that are loaded with information.
Yeah, 100 screens and they're loaded. So what is the very first thing before you do anything else? The why and all of that is fine, but when you look at this, what should you instantly be saying to yourself?
Holy crap.
Yeah. Somebody said, Pam, I think you said it, do we take this information and we cut it up? That's the starting point for sure. But more basic than this, who is a subject matter expert here in content? Are there any? Okay, so Leslie, who works with subject matter experts or content creators or yourselves, right? Okay, what's the hardest thing yourself as a content creator or working with the SMEs is the hardest thing for you or them to do?
To pick the most important stuff.
Yeah. Pull back on the content, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to say?
And actually, I was going to say, actually, we said that during our breakout session, just the pure mass of 100 slides, and how do you tailor it to what the learner absolutely needs to know and understand versus the nice bits, or lots of information that's unnecessary and can bog down the training.
Yeah,
I look at it with the get out of jail free card. So I look at it sometimes if it's being a subject matter expert in loss prevention, if you're doing corrective actions, right? And you're sort of managing people's performance, what should they have learned? What should we have made sure that they learned so that we wouldn't get to a corrective action or performance management? So I look at it sometimes that way of, where we failed and then go backwards.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's one of the hardest things to do is to pull back on content. Now, why do you think that we have a hard time pulling back on content? It is an extremely important question. why is it hard for us to pull back on content?
Oh,
Yeah.
I think based on my experience, it's a lot of it is, at least culturally, we think once you give everyone a training, check, you're done, it's over with. I don't need to do anything more.
Okay.
So it's understanding, I'd say, the different parts, like on the job versus what's there.
Okay.
People don't think through the whole thing.
Let's hold that thought for a second. I'm going to come back to that. Go ahead, Shelley.
Because training hours are limited, we feel that they need to know everything possible, because truly, honestly, in our culture right now, we don't go back and check for understanding.
Right.
We don't say you're going to learn this little bit today, and then we're going to build in that in a month from now, we're going to expand upon that, or check for your understanding, or review even how your training went, or what did you take away. So we look at it as it is a bucket list. It's a one and done moment. This is the only moment I'm going to get that person, and I have to make sure I download everything at that person, as opposed to saying, what do they need to retain, and what can we layer on later, and how do we ensure it gets layered on?
Well, you're touching a little bit on what Susanna said, and Robin will come to you in just 1 second. What is the consequence to the learner if they don't learn and they're not implementing the training as you would expect it to be? What do you do with that individual? Are they fired?
Well, no, well, it depends. We actually would, that's where I say you go into the corrective action scenario, right? And performance management, and you need to do this. Why aren't you doing this? And, they say, well, I didn't learn it. And you're like, well, we gave you the training.
But we've had this discussion that we know that most training isn't retained.
Yeah,
by virtue of the way it's built. So is it the learner's quote unquote?
No, it's our responsibility. It's the organization's, and I think that's what we end up doing a lot of times, is saying, what part do we own in this?
Yeah.
Right. When we're doing that corrective action or performance management, we go back and say, okay, was it a fast-paced training because, what happened right in there? And then we double back and waste. I mean, it's good for the learner because we have to double back and make sure they've got the information, but there tends to be potentially some waste of time and resources.
And it's also called learning scrap. The expression learning scrap comes from the fact that you either have too much content, it's not being retained, or like you said, you've got to go back to the learner. Is it good for the learner?
No.
If I throw my 14-year-old into my car right now, and I drive him around the block, and then I say, take the wheel and do like Dad did. And then he crashes the car and I get mad at him, right? And then I go back to him and I say, try it again. I'm not equipping him to be able to perform adequately. And I just want to hold that one last thing. So Robin, you had a comment you wanted to proffer as well.
No, I think it has to do also with just the sheer volume of expectations we have for them in terms of the learning. Everyone, as someone who has to funnel the communication down to the stores, there's a lot of learning that happens, and everyone, sort of what Shelley said, everyone thinks you launch it once, you've taught them, it's done. When they don't meet those expectations, they come back and say, well, exactly what Shelley said, we've taught you, you don't learn it. We're excellent, I think, as a company at launching stuff, and that's where it ends. The follow-up and the continuation is an opportunity.
Yeah, and that's called reinforcement. So how are you reinforcing training? And how are you preparing the learners to learn, which is called pre-training, right? So there's that pre-training, training, reinforcement, or post-training that is part of a strategy that will help bring the learners there where you want to bring them. But let me touch on everything that was said and what has resonated, which is what you were saying, Susanna, and I think Shelley also articulated it. There's not enough time to train. Is that Shelley that said that? We don't have enough time, right? Okay, so what's the difference between 1 hour of training and 2 half hours of training?
I think there's more retention if you have 2 half hours.
Right. So then why are we trying to fit 100 slides into a training? See, the point of this exercise is to say to yourself, if you have an hour and a half of training, Why are you trying to fit everything into one? Why aren't you breaking up the training in a way? And once we start looking at Bloom's taxonomy, it'll make even more sense. But why aren't we breaking up the training in what's, you've heard the expression before, digestible content, digestible modules, right? Digestible means that I can actually metabolize them, right? So it's taking me to that next step. When you are, I'm going to show you one last thing, one more slide, and then we're going to go for a break, okay? We use this, okay? When, as an agency, we work with umpteen number of subject matter experts and content creator. We have discovered Iowa several years ago, which helps us interact with our customers. Now, they don't have access to this. These are internal documents that you're seeing here. That helps us sit down with our content creators and say, what's the valuable content here? Oh, we're going to give them 100 slides. No. You're not paying us enough. I mean, that's the wrong expression, but you're basically saying to us, we've got a $10,000 budget and we want a 4-hour training. Well, we you know, that it's not a one-to-one match in that sense. So part of what we do, I'll just take an example here. I don't even know which one I clicked on. So this is for Pratt & Whitney. So what it's doing here is that when you are looking at your content and you receive that 100 slides, as an instructional designer, it's not your job to identify which is the right content. What you see on screen here is the way that we use this mind map to say anything, we receive this. So Pratt & Whitney says we want a 40-minute training, and they literally give us 4,000 pages of content, and it's all got to fit in there. And we're like, are you kidding me? You know, how do we identify the contents that's the correct one? And again, it's not your job to do that. It's the content creator. However, as an instructional designer, our job is to help identify what are the golden nuggets, literally. This has to be in the training. What are the silver nuggets? So it's in blue here. This can be in a resource in the training. Everything else, out. Yeah, but out. A, we don't have enough time. B, the training only lasts 40 minutes. C, there's a reason why it only lasts 40 minutes. And this is not a cost reason, although it does play into it, of course. You know, Susanna mentioned budgets. It's the same thing for us as for you. But then can we build a second training and maybe pull out of these purple ones some of the gold nuggets and build a 20-minute training around this one? Yeah, why not? We have an hour and a half budget. We're only doing a 40-minute module. So you need to start what is known as, if you're not doing it already, what is known as a predictive model to your training. What is 30 minutes of online training? How many slides is that? Show of hands. Who wants to give me? You're building a 30-minute e-module. How many slides does that represent? All slides included, from the welcome to this training on to the, you know, during this training you learned. How many slides do you have?
20 to 30.
Yeah, somewhere around the 25, maybe even the 35 mark. The intro is only 20 seconds. The outro might be 30 seconds, average a minute. You're talking 30 slides, 35 slides, somewhere inside of there. The resources don't count. Let's say that if you have to read a 25-page PDF, it doesn't count. But you've put it as a resource, so it's not necessarily an obligation, although you could make it one. But if you're going to make a resource an obligation, provide it as pre-training. Don't make them follow it during the training. Send it up front and say, you know, training opens June 1st. You have 3 weeks to read this. And then they'll do it the day before type of thing, right? But do the follow-ups. So when you're moving into this and you're starting to think of, you know, your presentation in front of the class or you know, workshop, we said this the last time. How many times do you follow a training and the last 20 minutes, the facilitators are going, oh, I got so many slides left, and then they start, and they're clicking through the slides trying to get that. Why'd you put them in there? You've got 400 slides you're trying to get through in an hour and a half. You're going to run through the last 300 of them, you know? Build your training in a predictive manner so that it actually matches. And the reason is, again, for the learner. If you're going above this 35, 40-minute threshold, you're going to lose the learner. They've got to get back onto the job. It's 9 o'clock at night. I can only stare at my screen for so long before I start to get fed up, whatever it is. The very first portion of this is, what's my predictive structure around this? And from there, I'm going to go back to my 100 slides. Somebody has a Cylon thing going on. Does anybody hear that? that's your very first thing. Then we're going to get into the why, the learners and all of that. But 30-minute training, 35-minute training, this is 30 slides. So when we start working with the SMEs and we get this, we will help them understand how to think about the training, but we just throw it back. Identify the content that it's all good. No, it's not. It's not going to fit in this training. And this is where writing the learning objectives becomes even more important. So this is where you can have the discussion with the SMEs and say, well, what are your learning objectives really and truly? So before we do a break, and I apologize for going just a second longer than I wanted to, I want to bring up one last slide and then we'll get our break.
While you do that, Edward, I have a question. Is it easier to ditch the 100 slides that was there and start from scratch?
No, not necessarily, because it contains all the content and more that you actually want to have for that training. So if you ditch it, you're probably going to have to go and redo all the work that was necessary to get that. You might want to cross-read it to make sure it's updated, ask those questions, but it's actually a collation of 50 hours of work just to put it together. I wouldn't ditch it, but it would. The question that we ask, of course, and I think I've asked even yourselves is this the latest content? Is it the final content? You know, so when you get it back, that's part of your question. Is this final content? Yes. Okay. Well, now let's talk about scope of the learning. So this will be the last slide. I don't remember if I showed this last time. I might have.
Yeah.
When we're talking about factors in performance, because this was brought up here, a lot of the questions you've brought up are actually performance related and not training related, which is interesting. There are two primary aspects that you want to be considering. One of them is the environment, so where the individual is working, and the individual, him or herself. Okay, so if we break information, instrumentation, motivation. So do I have the information? Do I have the resources, the tools to learn? What's my motivation to learn or to apply? So if I click through the first ones, and I'll give you 1 second just to read through, well, 1 minute just to read through this. All right, are we good? Okay, so basically, this is a question that as the purveyors of training, you should be asking yourselves. When it comes to the learners, are the expectations clear? Is the information clear? Are they getting feedback? Do they have the right resources, the time, the material, the environment, all of these things? This belongs to the environment, or in your case, the corporation. What are the motivations or the consequences, incentives or consequences to poor performance? Most of the time, in most corporations, and I'm not familiar with yours specifically, but in most corporations, there is no consequence to poor performance. You might not get your bonus at the end of the year, might get half of it, but there's no real consequence to poor performance. When it comes to the individual, I'll give you a second to read this. When you're done, I want you to take your annotation tool and just select 2 of them that would be the most important, in your opinion, in terms of performance. What are the 2 boxes that you believe are the most important and relevant when it comes to a learner's performance or an individual's performance? Which impacts it the most? Now, I know some of you have done the exercise already, so it's okay, but okay. Statistically speaking, this is what impacts the greatest performance back on the job. This is still used today, highly used today. It was developed, gosh, 70 years ago, 65 years ago. This is what impacts the bottom portion of that, the individual, him or herself. You could, to an extent, ask yourself, did I hire the right person? So it's not that it's untrue, but if you've hired the right person in, the individual itself becomes less relevant in that calculation, although this is still true. Are the current levels of knowledge and skills sufficient to do the job? Well, did you choose the right person? Are you actually providing them the training so that you can bring them up to speed? Did their onboarding work? It still belongs to you in this particular context. Otherwise, the two most important one are what good looks like. Is it being aligned to the business expectation? You know, are you giving them feedback on an ongoing basis? Do they have the tools before, during, after, so forth? If you look at this number, just those top two on the top left, you're talking 61%. 61% as a minimum belongs to the people that are providing the training. So any consequence that then falls back onto the learner, you say, you know what, there was an expression, my God, it's years old. It says something like, first you suffer your people for being poor, and then you punish them for stealing, right? Something along those lines. I forget who said that. So it's sort of the same things. First, you're not guaranteeing that they're going to be able to do the job, and then you're punishing them for not being able to do it. That's what performance is all about. What you own in that relationship and in that knowledge expectation is up there. And these are the numbers could vary percentage-wise, but they're very close to this in most organizations. So I'm not going to ask for feedback just yet. We can talk about it after the class. I'm going to put up a quick screen here. I think we've deserved. Where's my slide? Here it is. There. We'll give you ourselves a 7.3 minute. How do you say? I don't know that I can actually input 7.3, can I? Let's try it. And we'll go. Okay, invalid input. Okay, we'll go for 7 then. There you go. And I'll expect everybody back in 7 minutes, if that's good.
Okay.
I'll be staying online if you need to chat about anything. How is everybody doing? Nobody's, it's not suffering through this too badly so far?
No, all good.
No? Okay. Any general comments or everything is okay?
I wish I had this before I could welcome on board.
I know. Yeah, you capture those takeaways, Eduardo, as you would say, or those aha moments.
We've lived through many of them.
Well, I can't say this enough. These two books here are really, really, really interesting. What did I put in the other one? Oh, here it is. You know, this one here, which is a little thicker, but this one is really interesting because on chapter 3, it starts by, where is it? I believe it's on chapter 3. The chapter 3 starts by saying, I need a training program. That's how it starts, chapter 3. And it takes you through the reflective process around performance. And it's interesting because some of the groups that I delivered this to are really more training. Their thought process is really more around training than around performance. And this group seems to have a lot of interest more around performance. Not that you're not going to get some valuable pieces out of the training portion that we're going to look at, but you have a lot of questions that have to do with, well, you know, how do we get them to perform? You know, and that is part of its training, but part of it, as you saw, is a big piece of, do they have what they need to be able to perform, right?
And I guess the question that I was thinking about just on our break is all of the competing priorities that require the training, you know, and we make sure we build all those 30-minute, you know, modules, and we could also go there very quickly, right? So how do we layer all that in as well? Because there's always so many competing priorities and not enough hours in the day for anybody, regardless of what business.
Yes, and we're going to touch a little bit about some ideas around that in the third section, so that when you're thinking about your training, you're actually thinking about designing it in a more relevant way for the content and for the timing of when you're trying to deliver it. I don't want to go too much further on because are we stopping at 12 or is that at 12:30? I forget. Do we have a 12 or a 12:30 a deadline? Do you remember?
12:30.
Okay, so we still have plenty of time. I don't want to accelerate this, like I said. As I said in my last course, I think this presentation has 120 slides. I expect to be able to present about half of them. So far, so good. So what we will do is I'm going to start rebroadcasting my screen. Let's find this up again. Everybody had enough time for a break, or do you require a bit more time? C'est bon? Okay. So we're going to now go into the second piece, which is training design, but it's going to be the theoretical piece of training design. And then we'll, on the third portion, we'll actually start to look at more specific hands-on solutions in the methodology, from the portion of analysis right up to, we're not going to go as far as implementation, because implementation really is about making sure that it's into your LMS and all of these things, and what would be required strategically. And we're not looking at this strategically just yet, because these are the discussions generally that we need to hold to say, well, we don't have time to do pre-training and we don't understand reinforcement, and that could be a whole other discussion, but I'd be pleased to hold that with you, but it's not for this workshop right now. So let me just again find the right slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. This is where we are. We're on learning theory. So what we're going to start to do now is look at some of the fundamental theories around, am I sharing this? Around memory, because if you can understand a little bit more of the way memory works, and this is all very, very, very basic stuff, you could probably Google it, but I just want to be able to find a few of the right ones to help you understand, especially when we're doing e-learning in this case, why we do certain things in e-learning. You know, or if you're in an ILT, remember ILT is instructor-led training, so a face-to-face class. If you're in an ILT, what are some of the interactions and why you should be implementing various types of interactions? And even more importantly, if you've done ILT in the past and now pandemic and, you know, new paradigms for training, much more online stuff, how do you transform some of your ILT to maintain the same performance of objectives? Because you can't simply just say, well, I'm gonna change it into online training. It won't work. There are interactions, there are ways of treating content that cannot be done the same way online, as you well enough know. So we're going to talk about memory transfer. So the next slide or two is a little bit more didactic, but you know, be how do you say, forgiving to me, and then we'll get into more interactions in a slide or two from now. So first thing that we're going to talk about, of course, is human memory and the way it works. So you've heard about all of these things before. We're not going to go into all of the sensory and all of this stuff around memory. What we really want to be focusing on here is working memory. So, and then of course, ultimately the short-term memory. So the idea here is that working memory, which is, it's like RAM in a computer, right? If everybody knows what RAM is what can actually be used in your computer at that given time. So the idea of working memory is that I am capable in the short term of grabbing some content and then just sort of, you know, keeping it in my mind for a short period of time, which is in many cases, less than a minute. But what is important to know is that it is going to be stored and retrieved sequentially, right? And we had this little game, I think, in the last class workshop that we gave. If I give out a number and I say, well, let's see if you can remember 321-3193. Right? And then I ask Robin, what's the number that I just gave?
321-3193.
Okay. How about you, Shelley?
321-3193.
Okay. Audrey?
321-193.
Oh,
I think I missed one.
Now we're starting to lose trickle here, right? But that's the way it works. This is the way it works. Of course, it's a question of attention and all of these things, right? And it's okay because we are continuously disturbed. But how about I ask Leslie to give it back to me backwards?
Oh my goodness.
Right. You're not going to be able to, right? Because we are going to be able to give it back to you in the same
program, remembering it the other way.
Exactly. It was hard enough to get it the first time in. And in every time I give that example, by the third or the fourth degree, we start to lose some of that. Wait a second, what was it again? And it could be any reason our attention wanders, and it's all good. But why we want to know this is because When you've heard the expression, deliver your content from large to small. There's a reason for that, because people will remember it and will be able to spit it back out from large to small. So you're going from the why we're doing it to the greater notions, to the more specific concepts, and then down to the sequences themselves. If you do that out of sync, it's likely to be that it's going to be impossible because to regurgitate, but it's going to be much more difficult to try and replace these concepts, because naturally we want to go from greater understanding. You know, the infamous, anybody who has kids here, I mean, it wasn't like that when I was a kid, but today what we do is they show a word that said, they show an image, for example, of a dog, and then the word DOG is underneath. And the kid is 4 years old. They don't know how to read yet, but you're just looking at them with this and they're saying dog, so that they can associate the letters to the image, right? So this is very large association. Then we're going to start to learn, then we're the words, then the alphabet, or the alphabet, then the words, and so forth. So long-term memory is stored and received by association, and that's what we want to be able to do. So if you're thinking sequentially, and you're saying, well, I'm going to go from the large to the big so that the short-term memory can process it. While you're doing that, you also have to be able to associate the content. And this is why if you've heard about adult learning principles, they want to say, why is it relevant to me? How am I going to use it back on the job? Give me real world examples, all of these things, because I will be able to associate these back to. So does anybody here have an example? I'll take the share off just for a quick second. Anybody have an example of a sense memory, or that happened to them recently in the past couple of days, week or so, where they said, my God, I think I recognize that smell. It happened to me yesterday. My son came up to me and he had just showered and he put his head right here, and I went and I sniffed his head deeply, you know, and he smelled like shampoo. And the sense memory of when I was like 9 years old came up, and I said, oh my God, this smells like herbal essence. Anybody remember that? You know?
Yeah. Do the commercial?
Yeah, the commercial
It doesn't
of that
give you
girl
the-
sitting in the Garden of Eden, you know, and it brought me back to that. Anybody have any one of those recently, some type of sense memory?
Mine, but it's not good.
Oh, well, can you share it?
Sure. A friend of mine offered me a drink and I said, sure. And it was a punch and it had Jack Daniels in it.
Oh, those are bad memories.
Yes. And so, you know, to put it in context, yeah, I got really sick on Jack Daniels when I was like 18.
Yeah.
And I can't, and you would think over 30, well, yeah, over 30
get
years
over it.
later.
Yeah, I had that with Southern Comfort. You'd think that these drinks should be written like rite of passage on them, because those are the awful ones that we go to at 17, 18 to sort of, you know. Oh yeah, that's a good one. I think you were going to say something, Leslie, as well.
Oh, I was just going to say I had that with actually a lilac bush. I walked weekend and I just got that smell of a lilac, and it brought me back to my grandmother, you know, when I was very, she had a ton of lilac bushes, all the properties. So just memories, right? That come back.
Those sense memories, here we spoke about the nose in the end, because even food tasting has to do is relying back on the nose and the experience, of course. We tie back in by association, and we can unlock so much that's going on in our brain because of it. So how? I'm gonna do this again. I have to find the slide if you give me just a second. And this should be an interesting exercise, but it should still work. What are the name of my kids?
Oh, right.
Maddox.
Noah.
Was it Noah?
Yes,
Noah.
Maddox and Noah. Isn't that incredible? Because of, right, the mnemonic that I tied it back into, we can remember it. So in your strategies of finding in a 30-minute module, 1 or 2 key messages, use these techniques, these mnemonics, and these, you know, the repeat. Who can tell me the number that I've mentioned before?
3213193.
But that's one of the strategies, is you repeat in the right way, in the right fashion, and so forth, and you will be able to plant a few of these nuggets where you say to yourself, like I said at the beginning of this workshop, what are the 3 words that we want to retain?
Context, relevance, interactivity.
Yes, and you should start to see the tie-in to what I'm saying here. That context ties into pushing from short-term to long-term. If I can tie it back into its relevance to the learner, et cetera, et cetera. This is why, if I'm capable of conveying 5 or 6 key messages to you, it will have an impact if you're capable of implementing them. So I'll come back to this. So we're really going to be talking about working memory and how do we push it into long-term memory. That's what we want to be able to focus on, because you've got a 1-minute slide inside of a 35-minute experience. So again, what are those key pieces that you want to be able to push in, and how do you get them to associate so that they are retained afterwards? In live stuff like this, it is incredibly easy to do, as you've seen. I can probably ask you the question at the end of this in 2 hours from now, what's that number? And somebody will be able to give it to me. It's incredibly easy to do in live. So we're going to look at a little bit more online stuff, but it's the same process, it's the same principle. So don't be afraid to do it. In some of your training, you say all of the information is important. All right. But what are like the 3 really important ones? And by saying at the beginning, these are the learning objectives, and by repeating them on the last slide, that's not going to do it. You need to be tying it because you're trying to throw it into long-term memory, and that works best, of course, by the sequence and by association. So that's fine. Okay. So what are the 2 primary, certainly for online training, that we're going to use? The 2 primary channels is going to be the visual and the auditory, right? This is what we're going to use the most. I can't smell anything.
Did you want to share it? We don't see.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing. Okay. I wish I'd known that. I wouldn't have given away the answer. Okay, so like I was saying, right? The two that we're using is the eye and the ear. I could, I suppose, in some ways actually use touch, but touch and smell and taste, well, it's not really relevant in online training as little as possible. So if we're going from what we said before, working memory, and we're trying to push it into long-term, we need to take full advantage of the use of the eye and the ear in the most effective way possible. So by using both of these channels, you're going to enhance the very first step of it, which is retention, by pushing it into long-term. I'm going to ask a question here. Who has taken online training that they haven't enjoyed? Okay, a lot of us haven't necessarily enjoyed the long. Yeah. What is 1 or 2 of the reasons? And try and bring the reason down to the design of the training.
That's exactly what came to mind. Oh, sorry, I interrupted somebody. If it's flat, if it's just words on a screen and no images, I have a real hard time with it.
Absolutely. That has been proven over the past 20 years or so, that the use of, especially I would say over the past 12 or 13 years, that the use of icons and imagery and the way we associate it to the right words on screen pushes that up. Again, it's an association.
I was going to say I'm sorry, I should put my hand up. I was going to say tone of voice also too. Makes a big difference if it's engaging or not.
Yeah. So one of the underlying principles of online training is conversational. Conversational is what we are doing right here. It doesn't mean it's not professional, but it's not like, welcome to this training on no, it's, hey, welcome to the training on this. Today we're going to learn about, and this is why I say that it's okay to plant things. Are we off the share? Yes. It's okay to plant things, like I was saying, like mnemonics and things like that in your training, because you want it conversational. This is especially 2022, we've lowered over the past few years, we've lowered our guard when it comes to, formality and things like that, where we've accepted this greater levels of informality in the content and in the information that we are receiving due to more digitized interactivity. Leslie, I think you wanted to say something as well.
I was going to say that very similar to Angela, just too much content, lots of, like too many sentences, too many words, and very, very dry, to digest. Perfect.
So again, your predictive structure, that is part of it. Build a predictive structure for your training to say, I've got 30 slides, maximum 4 bullets, that type of thing. No eye candy, right? You must have relevant imagery and so forth on screen, or at the very least, if it's not relevant, it has to be non-intrusive. I need to either forget the image or I need to associate, but it must not impact and create what's known as cognitive noise. This noise will disturb my retention. Yes, Susanna.
For me, the biggest irritant is definitely when someone just reads the slide and there's nothing more that they give you.
Yeah.
I'd rather just read it myself. than attend the training.
Yes, there is learning theory out there that is being, I should say, debated over the past 5 years. Some people say that, and it's not untrue, but you know that that learning theories don't actually exist. You know, in the sense that if we throw everybody into the same room and we present them with content, we will all learn something to a certain degree. But it's being debated simply because they say, well, there's no auditory learners. Well, you know what? That's also debatable, right? I personally agree with you. If somebody's going to read to me, then what's the use? I'm not trying to read. There are ways to build that so that it makes sense. But how about synchronizing content, like on-screen content to narration?
Oh, yeah, I love that.
If you do not do it, then you are creating noise. And the worst, there are two kinds of issues inside of there. A, the synchronization has to be exact. Some people say, well, I like to see the words come up on screen first. But that's because you like reading. You're not enjoying the narration here. Because if otherwise, the narrator will come and complement the stuff that's on screen. And now I'm really using these two channels here. And two, if the narrator says, you know, Jill walked into the room and sat on a bench, and on screen you see Jill walks into a room on chair, and that word bench and that word chair are different, I've created some noise there. And even if it's for a hiccup of a moment, my brain is going, wait a second, what was that? This is why when you're building your storyboards from your scripts, you take your script as it is, you place it into your storyboard, and then you clean it up. You remove all of the irrelevant content, but you don't change the content. It has to match exactly what the narration is doing. All right. So a couple of techniques for pushing that into long-term memory. We're going to be looking at encoding techniques, storage techniques, and retrieval. So encoding it's a very interesting theory. We're going to look at it on the next slide. The idea of encoding is that you need to take information that you are seeing or that you are hearing, and you're going to need to build it into what you already know. Again, if I come back to adult learning principles, how is it relevant? Are you giving me real world examples? And we'll look at the ALPs a little bit later on, but that's what encoding means. It'll be easier for me to push it into long term if I can associate it to something and I can move it into what I already know as knowledge. And what I already have as knowledge. And this is why you've heard people say things like, we're going to level the playing field first in this training. You know, the first half of the module, we're just going to level the playing field. That means that I want everybody to at least try and fundamentally have the same structure so that what I'm going to be teaching as new over here is going to fit at the right place in what they already know. Forming mental images, of course, creating associations, what we just said. So that's how we're going to encode it. Then we have to store it by using, like we said, auditory images, videos, anything that's going to be able to use both channels. And again, keeping far from eye candy, right? Or any type of noise candy, or, you know, there's enough going on in training that you don't need to have a lot of bells and whistles. And the less you have, the more relevant bells and whistles you have, the better it's going to be. Visualizing the technique of repeating, the use of semantics, which is what we did with my children. And retrieval, well, when we retrieve, we're going to retrieve by association. So for me, the herbal essence is that very, very, like, I don't know, 45, 46-year-old association. So the sequence that you're going to be building in, how can you vet that? And the idea about providing a certain sequence is that when you're going to be vetting if the training has been understood and is being applied and all of that, you have to expect people to give it back to you in the same sequence, right? So you don't want to teach something one way and expect somebody to give it back to you in a different way. And this is why, again, the structure of how you're training and how you're building your learning becomes really, really, really important, especially if you end up with too many slides. And you say, I can't retain it all. Oh, you can't do all of, well, I remember two of the processes. Well, maybe you gave too much content in your training. And it's just because of that, there's too much noise. I can't get it back out. Recognizing mnemonics, recall, search and retrieve. Anyway, we're going to look at a whole bunch of these techniques. So encoding techniques, so the very first stage is, what that means is, how can I modify the information that's already stored in my memory based on the new experience? Not modify it and so much change it, but enhance it. So this here is an example of a cognitive structure. So this is where we are, all of us, at any given time in the day. We have what's some type of mental structure. We see something. It could be training. It could be anything that's around us that we notice. We're going to take that information and just as a visual representation, we're going to interpret it somehow based on what our previous experience is. We're going to plug it into our mental schema, and then we're going to move forward on to the next one. Now, millions of these happen simultaneously, of course, but I'll give you an example of how that becomes relevant in your training. When I went over to CN, which is one of our business partners, this happened about a year and a half, maybe just before the pandemic, in fact. Wow, has it been that long? I walk into the office. Now, my first 10 years of my career was marketing. I did marketing I was in several agencies. I did 2 or 3 different agencies. So I worked on a lot of marketing projects. I walk into the CN and I see on their desk a white cup with a black CN logo on it. Anybody have an opinion on how I might have reacted to that? As somebody who was a marketing director for 10 years, what I might have reacted to.
Isn't their color red?
The logo is red. That's definitely it. And so what does that mean in the back of my mind?
Well, lack of brand consistency. That
could be extremely unlikely, but absolutely somebody screwed up in production. Although that, as unlikely that is, it's got to go through so many vetting stages. So, okay, let's say that it's not because it could be that. But let's say that,
like, why did they make it black?
Yeah.
Change the color. What's going on here?
You know, branding is like, what's the value of my brand? You know, how much is my brand worth? Coca-Cola's brand is $65 trillion. I'm not going to change anything on it. So for me, I saw this, and as a marketer, I said, there must have been some event, and then I wanted one. Right? I said, can I get one of those cups? You know, I mean, you'll never see this again. No, this was for a special thing or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. Fine. So knowing this is going to tie back into adult learning principles that every individual coming in will not necessarily interpret your content the same way. And your job is to help them interpret it in the right way by potentially leveling the playing field. Now, if we think about leveling the playing field, what is the right way to do it in training and why? I'm going to ask this question again. In your case, in your situation, why is it, how would you think about leveling the playing field? Or an example of why it is important to level it? Is my question clear?
I feel like if you're, and maybe this may be completely off, but I feel like if you're maybe in the example, for us, for example, we're looking to relaunch our customer experience model. Yeah. And for us, you know, we need to level the playing field because of different tenureship within the organization. And, you know, sort of that it is a relaunch. So it's an update, it's a refresh, it's all those things. It could be any of that, but if we don't level the playing field, we can't assume that the folks that took it before are going to retain what was once had. And then we're not going to have the same consistency, I feel.
That's perfect. And I'll comment on that. I think somebody else wanted to say something. Did anybody else want to speak? Okay, no. That is perfect. Oh, I'm sorry. I cut you off again. Go ahead, Leslie. Yes.
Putting up some, I was just saying, like setting the context, making sure that everybody understands what the base foundation is. Or you move forward and enhance.
Yes, because what you have in this case, Christy, is incredible amount of noise, an incredible amount of learning noise in their mind. Let's take an example that would be applicable to all of us here. Certainly, for all of us that are Canadians, we're all Canadians here. If you go to England and you rent a car and you say, I'm going to drive up to Stonehenge, we're all going to be like this, right? We are all going to be afraid. I got to drive on the right side of the car. And yet, you know, half of the nations in the world do it on the right side of the car, but we know it on the left side of the car. We have incredible amounts of learning noise to be able to actually get there. So if you keep that example and now you look at your launch of rebranding and all of that stuff, what would be the prudent thing to do? What would be the prudent thing for me to do before I go to England and drive on that side of that street?
Research.
Research for sure.
Yeah.
More generally would be what? Like in your case or in any situation where you know I need to learn something.
Practice or expose yourself to it.
Pre-training of some kind. If you are leveling the playing field inside of your training, you are taking away, you're taking a huge risk. and B, you're taking away from the core of the content that you actually want to be delivering to people. So how do you, when you, I think somebody mentioned it, and in fact, several times, we don't have a strategy. We box it, we send it, we check the box off, it's done. Yeah, we know only 5% is going to be retained. Okay, so we know that going in. There's too much content, it's too long, there's all of these other issues. Okay, if I can't change anything here, can I just bring a little bit inside of here so that this might go from 5 to 15 to 20%? Because I'm going to pull outside of that. Pre-training, getting ready for people to learn, right? This is what, we've all been to university. We have to read books. Before I get to class, I got to read chapter 4. I'm not going to read chapter 4 in class, right? That's what we're doing otherwise. We're reading chapter 4 in class when I should be learning, creating the foundation on my own, having an opportunity for scaffolding. In learning, we call it scaffolding. Means how are you providing support to your learners when they are learning on their own? Because they're reading chapter 4 and they say, holy crap, I don't understand this. Who can I call? Because I got to learn this by class next Tuesday and I don't understand. Who am I going to call? So how are you scaffolding your learners? How are you supporting them in their learning process? So all of this will allow you to get to the training and say, you know what, I can reduce my training because I don't have to put the leveling inside of there. The resources I've given them up front, I've given them a way to reach out to me if it's necessary. Now I can focus on the training. And I'm assuming now, as I go back to my, as I go back to this and I say, okay, I think we pretty much all have basically the same cognitive structure here. So over here, I've informed people, by the way, 2 years ago, there was a CN thing on this, blah, blah, blah. We actually had a great opportunity to, change the logo for this very important event on whatever it is. And people walk in and they create the same circle. It's got the same tie-in by leveling again, but not in the training. And just keep in mind, you wouldn't read a book during your class. Yes, Leslie.
Can I ask somewhat of a silly question, but just as you're talking, I'm thinking of prerequisites and whether for adult learning, that should also be staged. Like if there's training, whether it's, learning, independently or, things or skills that the learner would require before, say, in Christy's example, customer experience, that they would go back and complete past modules and things like that. Is there a sequence that for adults we should
in terms of which content what type of content to
frame, like a couple of weeks before the training, like just
okay, the primary guideline is basically, your question is how do you build on previous training? Okay, what the main strategically, first of all, you want a mix of training. You don't want to deliver all e-learning, for example. You don't want to deliver all through coaching. You don't want to deliver everything in class. There are budgetary reasons, but there are also so many other learning reasons why it's beneficial to use mixed learning. A. B, part of the strategy of understanding your learners is understanding, again, what we said before, is when they're going to learn and how fast are they going to be able to apply what they've learned. So if you give them something on January 1st and they're only going to start practicing it in April, they've lost it entirely. So if that's the case, because you have no choice, you need to figure out what we said at the beginning, reinforcement messages, to make sure that when I get here, I still have this, plus I've improved upon it. And that's that portion when we showed those boxes. That's, do I have, that's the middle box in the middle, the resources. So there's no right answer in terms of it's 10 days or anything like that, but it needs to be strategically reinforced through practice, follow-up, discussions with managers. Do you understand it? You could even, what we do in several cases, we'll build a training package, and we're going to say, we're going to build a reinforcement module while we're building the training. And this reinforcement module is just a case study. It's going to last 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And we build it at the same time as we're building the trainings. And so when we package the big training and the small one, well, 2 weeks later, you just hit the LMS button, everybody gets it, and they've got a small piece of reinforcement. Natalie walked into the store recently and she was looking for this or whatever it is. How would you react to this? What would be the gift? Well, how should you, what are the 3 things that you should be asking her? And this is going to tie back into the 3 steps that you provided to them during the training previously. So you're looking for these ways of always feeding that. And they can be small, easy one-offs. You could even write back to them and say, okay, and we're going to get to this now. You can actually write back, send something out and say, what's the phone number again? And that's all. I'm not asking you why. Just give me the phone number again, because if you still have it back here after a week and a half, that means that the mnemonic that I planted worked, and now I can build upon it. And the next piece of the training is, remember that number we talked about? That's the combination that when you walk into the store and you flick on the lights, that's the combination to go into the I don't know, whatever it is, some example along those lines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. So, did I finish? Yeah, I covered what Christy was saying. So I'm going to show one or two small things. We're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of actually the looking at learning objectives and things like that. Learning objectives, the analysis phase, a whole bunch of techniques for that. So I believe you still see the screen. I'm going to skip some of these things because I'm covering them well enough, but I do want to come to this as an example. So we're talking about semantic encoding. I want you to just keep in mind just ways of simplifying some of your content, or at least thinking about simplifying it. The idea being, of course, is that you want to bring the content down to its most basic form, because that's what's most digestible. Does anybody like classical music here online? Like real heavy duty classical, like 16th century type of music, well, 17th century type of music. Anybody ask yourselves why? Okay, so a few people. There are a few songs we like, right? For sure. There's a few other classics that we like. Why don't we like classical music? And why do we like, and while you're looking for that answer, why do we like many cases, more perhaps rhythmic or pop or things like that? Oops, I don't know.
Exposure.
What's that?
Exposure.
What do you mean exposure?
Well, I mean,
we're exposed to more of it. Sorry. Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. It's part of who we are. My kids listen to me. I'm stuck in the 70s and the 60s and a bit in the 80s for sure. So, but we know that, right? The years that affect us most in terms of music are like 13 to 17, when our heart is being ripped out by the person that we love. Never love this way again. So those are the years that impact us the most in that emotionally. But what would be perhaps another reason? Julie, you said you like it, right? So
yes, well, I think there's something about how it engages your brain, because they say it has a lot of impacts on babies and on even at the end of your life, it also has impact. So I guess there's something connected to your brain.
Okay, I'm going to go from that. Can you hear this?
Yep.
I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's too long. It's like 5 minutes, but I will let the first 2 minutes and a half play. Okay, you'll enjoy this, I think.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jordan.
I'm Lee.
And we are the Axis of Awesome.
And I'm Benny.
Yeah, we've been a comedy rock band for close to 40 years now. And all that time, we've never had a hit.
Yeah, but you guys know why.
Why?
Because we never wrote a 4-chord song.
What's that? What's a 4-chord song, Benny?
Well, if you want all the greatest hits from the past 40 years, just use 4 chords. Same 4 chords for every song. It's dead simple to write a pop hit.
Just 4?
Yeah, these 4. Here. 1, 2, 3, 4 chords.
Sorry, let me get this straight, Chicken Little. What you're trying to say is you can take those 4 chords, repeat them, and pump out every pop song ever. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Fuck off.
Yeah, fuck off, Chicken Little.
Just listen. Do you recognize this?
Yeah, that is Don't Stop Believing by Journey.
It's a great song.
Very original.
There's a few more that
song.
fit. Check it out. My life is brilliant. My love is pure. I saw an angel. Of that I'm sure.
Well, that's just 2 songs that are similar. That's
forever young.
3 songs.
I wanna be forever young. I won't hesitate no more, no more. It cannot wait. I'm yours. This is the way you left me. I'm not pretending. No love, no hope, no glory, no happy ending. 'Cause you were amazing. We did amazing things. If I could, then I'd go wherever.
Okay, I don't want to go any further, but if you want to see, they're called the Axis of Awesome, and it's called 4-chord song. If you ever want to look that up, the point of the message that I'm trying to convey to you is that for most people, classical music is way too complicated. You know, it's using so many variations, so many this, and its song starts off in, you know, B flat minor, and then it, well, B flat minor, same thing, but say B flat, and it's just too complex. There's too much going on. This is a great example of, we all love 4-chord songs. Every song that they play, at least the 4 or 5 of them that are, you know, in the 40s to 50s generation, we all love that music, and we continue to listen to it today. So in the same sense, and I'll come back to what I was saying here, is that anything that has to do with your training needs to have that same level of simplicity to understand, especially if you are trying to teach something complex. And so by that, when we go back to the idea of, I'm trying to build a 1-hour training and dump everything inside of there, you know, build your training so that instead of doing that, maybe it's just going to be a 20-minute training focused on the most essential. And then you're going to have other pieces of training around it to support that training. Level the playing field, pre-training, a more simplistic way of just remembering some content before I move into the level of understanding, and so forth and so on. Because that simplicity for us, and it's not because we're dumb, certainly. I mean, we're all pretty smart here, I'm sure, but we are so occupied by so much. We saw this in the facilitation course, right? Remember, you wake up and you've already got your screen, and then digital just consumes us for the rest of the day, and then information and then all of this stuff. It's just too much. So for your training to come down to really the essential of what you're trying to do and not explode it across many topics is going to become critical. And I just want to show you one example here. Obviously, this is what came back to before, the 2 senses that we're going to concentrate on. I am sharing it, yeah. So the eyes and the ears, but okay, so mnemonics, let's look at some imagery, for example. Let me show you 2 examples. So does anybody recognize what this is?
It's a map of Montreal, no?
Yeah, it's the map of basically old Montreal into, it goes as high as Sherbrooke. We actually have St. Catherine over here. Obviously a pretty old picture. I'm going to show you the exact same map. The exact same. I'm going as high as Sherbrooke over here. I'm not showing the water down in old Montreal, so I'm got a little bit of a zoom in. But oh my God, the difference between the two.
Yeah.
And that's only because I want to be able to show, for example, if I go back to this image here, and I say, well, you know, you're going to take Lucien Lallier, get onto the green line, and go all the way past down. I say, well, where's Lucien Lallier? It's somewhere along the La Montagne. Okay. Well, the essential content that I'm trying to give you is it wasn't even the green line. It's the orange line. The essential content I'm trying to give you is much more visible. It's still in a certain context of showing the Montreal, but this is the way you need to formulate your training. Take away the noise that anything that you would perceive as noise. And that noise can be the duration of the module, like it can be the visuals that you're using on screen, the amount of content that's on screen, the person who's narrating it, the tone of the narration. I mean, the more you advance in refining every one of these, you know, can anybody tell me what their favorite dish is? I personally like tuna fish salad sandwich, but does anybody like, and I'll come back to my example in a second. Shelley, you have a favorite?
I was just, when you said tuna fish, I was like egg salad sandwich, like that triggered me.
Okay, but let me take that example. So are there any examples of an egg salad sandwich that you ate that you go, holy crap, now this is an egg salad sandwich?
Yes.
And who would have made it?
It was made at the bagel stop.
Okay. I have the same example. I love cooking. I'm Italian. I love cooking Italian food, lasagnas, and all the complexity around that. But man, a tuna fish salad sandwich, right? And as much as I can't make them because my son is allergic to it, but there's one place over near Kirkland, someplace, in this small little bread shop that I've tried to copy it. I've tried to imitate. I just can't make it. What the hell are they putting into this that you bite into? You say, I finally find out, white pepper, you know, who has white pepper? You know, nobody uses that. Maybe Kentucky Fried Chicken, it's their main ingredient, but you see, so it's all of these little things where you, as you're formulating all of this experience, is to say, what is that one special ingredient? Or if I've simplified it down to something, what is the one ingredient that's going to make that difference? What would you say, Shelley, that is making the difference in this particular bagel shop?
They grated red onion into the egg salad instead of just putting a little bit of green onion in it.
There you go. Such a simplicity to do, but all of the difference for that experience in your mouth. And again, this is part of what you're trying to have your learners experience, is that little piece of to be able to tie it in, retain it, transfer, yeah, all of that stuff. We're going to go into one last thing before we take a break. And then like I said, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of it. So have you ever heard of learning styles, of the theory learning styles? Okay, so like I said before, I don't want to get into that debate, because really and truly, some people are hard, learning styles don't exist, and others are like, yes, they do. So let's not get into that. And let's assume that there is a midway between the two. Kolb came up with something that was called the learning styles originally. It was meant to create learning in an optimal way. And this was the graph that was designed around it. We look at people that are more feeling, more thinking, more watching, more doing. That's the sum of it. Who is more feeling in the way they believe they learn? Anybody? All right, Florence. How about watching? Oh, interesting. Okay. Doing? That's where all the hands go up usually. Yeah. Okay. And thinking? Okay. All right. So we're going to sort of focus on what's known as accommodating and assimilating, which is the mix, which is the sort of the mesh halfway between all of them. And the idea is going to be something that is called teacher-centered, which is conditioning, versus learner-centered. What does teacher-centered mean? I'm sure you've heard of that expression as well. What does teacher-centered mean? Yeah, Shelley?
The majority of the content is delivered by the teacher.
Yes.
And that the teacher is setting the pace and the information that's being delivered.
Right. So who has had that type of teacher in their classes, university, CJEP, whatever it is, where I remember walking into one of my classes during my undergrad, and the person had a mic on. I think we were like 400 in this class, 400. And all was and you're listening to this, you said, I will never graduate from this class. I got to find something else because this is brutal. So it's more of a, without saying an information dump, it's more of a way of sending information out and then seeing, you know, how the students are going to interact with that content based on the way that I sent it out. Whereas the learner-centered or the more social is exactly the other way around. The example that I like to use often is that it's not, maybe less relevant, but if you've never seen a pen before, some people would rather take the pen and write with it for 20 minutes, and then we'll get together and we'll talk about it. Whereas some people would rather I talk about the pen for 20 minutes, and then I'll give it to them. There is no good way, and in all circumstances, we will learn in both. You know, depending on where we are, again, in that cognitive schema, we cannot expect that all of our training will be super highly interactive. We do need to provide information. So there are pieces inside of there where this is where it becomes even more important to make the information as relevant as possible and as clean cut as possible, because I'm information dumping for a period of it. And then I'm going to, as a facilitator, I'm going to just watch how people do it after that. Now, what circumstance, I think we talked about this in the facilitation class again, but I'll come back to it. So in what profession would more of a teacher-centered approach be appropriate?
Potentially, I guess, if it's more something that's like a process or something that's like, I'm just thinking if there was like a policy change or like something that was very not tactical, like not where you would have to be doing as much, but is more information that you needed to know, like the need to know versus the need to do, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yes, I would just say that it doesn't mean that I cannot have it as a more socially engaging discussion. I don't need to dump it onto you. But what I understand what you're saying. What you're saying basically is that the training itself only needs to take me to remembering what to do.
Right, exactly.
Not so much understanding why I'm doing it. And that is an extremely valid point, but even in the way that I do it, I could take you just to remembering in a more learner-centered, yeah, in a more, you know,
yeah,
but think of a profession perhaps where there's no discussion, we do it teacher-centered. A profession or a field of work, whatever it is.
Something with a lot of rules, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Where there is no option for to vary the process or the procedure, right? I mean, where it has to be everybody, it's more of a robotic type
Right.
of everybody has to do it like this.
That's exactly right. Military kids, right?
Soldiers, yeah, kids, yeah.
You don't need to know why. And not only do they not need to know why, they mustn't know why, because that will chew up the bandwidth to actually react when you need to react. Don't cross the street, stop at the light. You know, just stop. When you get to the corner, stop. And they're running, stop, that type of thing. Military. If you think about pulling, who's at the other end of that bullet, when you pull the trigger, you might not pull, and it'll cost you your life.
Yeah.
So there are circumstances where that exists. And so the message here essentially is that you want to, I don't want you to leave this training saying, well, it's going to be super engaging. It's going to be, no. You need to know when to use the right technique at what moment and how to think about that. And you're not going to get all of that out of this workshop. We're going to talk about a few of them, but you do want to potentially, there's a whole bunch of other books that I suggest so many books, but there's one here, Managing Memory for Deeper Learning, Practice and Feedback for Deeper Learning. I've got just so many books, performance coaching. I could suggest some. You do need to find some system that works for you to be fed information somehow. Sometimes it's LinkedIn groups and things like that. Just every now and then get a message across. That's pretty interesting. I remember assisting in, I think it was an ATD conference, right? An ASTD conference. God, it's got to be 20 years ago. And it's during that conference that the research around knowledge checking, that's where it was presented. Knowledge checking in an online or in a training module hadn't yet been a popular. Today we say, yeah, you got a knowledge check, formative throughout the module, and then do a summative at the end. It wasn't popular back then. So by assisting in that, that's the only thing I got out of it, but it completely changed the way we design after that, right? So you need to find the quick wins to start to find, how does all of this come together? And I will show you some of the basics, but if you want to take it to another notch, even if you say to yourself, I'm going to read one book a year, well, that book will make a lot of change, will bring a lot of change to the way you think about your training. If you have that time. We don't all, it's so hard even to read a book. A lot of us don't even have time to read a book, but hopefully that's not the case here. So we're going to finish on that. I'm going to put up we'll do a 6-minute one here. When we come back, we're going to start looking at a little bit more of the meat and potatoes. So we'll put up a 6-minute 0.1 timer. And when we come back, like I said, we're really going to get into looking at learning objectives and analysis and all of that stuff. I just have to find my timer, and I think I have to cough. Excuse me. There you go. I'll be online if anybody wants to chat. Anybody have any questions? Anything they want to address?
I guess my one question, as I'm thinking about training, and pre-training, is it reasonable to, or a good practice to sort of say, like I thought about leveling the playing field and saying, okay, read this policy before you attend the training, and then the training, we're going to show you how to implement that policy in an efficient and effective way, and why we're doing this, and then have a sort of, like you said, a small sort of reinforcing module built in later where it could be interactive and we can test to see if they're doing that after the fact.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. The only one thing that I would add to what you said was, what's going to make it pre-training and not pre-information?
Well, yes, it could very much, it would be more like pre-information than pre-training.
So pre-information, you're allowing for a fair amount of misinterpretation or of personal interpretation, unless it's you're providing a way for the learner to think about. Say, okay, I'll just stop this. To think about that policy. So if you're just giving them the document and saying, read this, we're going to talk about it, you're not providing them any guidance on how to formulate that circle, that we were talking about, that cup.
Okay.
It's okay to do this, but you might want to give some guidelines to say, keep this context and relevance. Keep this, take of this, primary, best takeaway, all of that stuff, note down, whatever it is. So it's still information, but at least you're giving them some guidance towards how you're trying to formulate that.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's open for debate. Plus, if it's very lengthy, and again, you don't know when they're going to be reading it, and they might come there and say, yeah, no, I didn't really read it, or I looked at it, it was too much. Maybe if you would have told me which sections are the most important, I would have read those, anything along those lines.
Okay. So sort of keep in the sort of what the response of the learner would be in that case. Because I'm just thinking sometimes we deliver information, right, in the e-learning, and then at the end we say, and here's the resources for you. And I think to myself, how many times have I gone and clicked on those resources and dug deeper? And then I'm thinking, if I knew what that, like, let's say for my example, it would be how to do the daily verification of paperwork, right? And the reason we do it is to prevent losses, right? If they read that one policy on, let's say, the opening verification of paperwork and understood that, okay, this is the expectation that we have, and we're going to show you how to do this now in the e-learning. And we would walk them through how you do it, what you're looking for, what are the signs of abuse. Would that be a better way to do it than
hoping that they read it for themselves and take away? The one thing that you need to add to what you said is what's in it for them.
Yes, and that would be at the very beginning, like, why are we doing this? And we're doing it to,
Not why are we doing it, that's context.
Okay.
What are you going to take? How is it relevant to you in your job? What's the consequence of not doing it?
Right.
Okay. You have to situate it so the person says, well, if I don't take time to do it, if they're not telling me that I have to do it, I'm not going to do it. If I don't understand why, it means I don't understand the impact. I don't understand the consequence. I don't understand the benefit. If you do it, there'll be a reduction in this. It'll, impact you positively for what, and beyond the store, right? Beyond the chain. Because let's face it, I only have 26 employees, and they don't, I shouldn't say they don't care, but there are aspects of what they do that they don't care about the impact on it. And I can go back in them and say, well, listen, something as simple as buying $1,000 pair of earphones, which we need because when we do our audio, we really want crystal. Well, I buy it, and the next day somebody's taking it and wrapping it around their thing, and a day and a half later, the thing is damaged. That's $1,000. Well, it would have been, but what do they care? There's no negative impact. It's not like I'm going to say, well, you're going to buy me a new pair now, or the company a new pair. So how do you tie in the needs of the corporation so that the learner can say, well, this is how it affects me? And sometimes just saying, we're a team, and if we make, we generate more positive revenue this year, we'll be able to hire more. That's still not what's in it for me, because I'm not going to be saying to myself, I might lose my job next year. That might not be a relevant. So this is why knowing who your learners are becomes really important in the analysis phase. What motivates these people? What really motivates them, especially if you've got, and I don't know in this case for Reitmans, but what if 50% of your sales force or your in-store force are seasonal workers, you know, from April to September? Well, it's even less important for them, as an example, you know. So
Right.
how do you tie all of this back into them, positively or negatively, is important.
And I think that's really important that you say that, actually, because bringing it back down to that comment that you made earlier about bringing it down to its most simple form so that it's relevant for almost like the wider audience, because I'm thinking about, as an example, just knowing that, you know, for example, in our fashion associates, we turn the most, obviously, right? And, you know, the percentage of new versus tenured is always is seemingly higher in that category, right? So I think it's important.
Yeah. It all, as we start to take steps back, and all of a sudden we look at all of this and we say, well, if I can change one or two fundamental aspects strategically of what I'm doing, what would it be? And at the very top of this list, when you say, again, coming back to Julie's great word, which is fantastic, why am I doing this? Right next to it is, who are my learners? What motivates them? What are my consequences? When, how, what, why are they? No, today's segmentation is incredible, right? When I was 10 years old, you had three markets, three segments. You had the old people, the middle people, and the young people. Today, it's segmented up to, you know, well, this person is a, I don't know, a Black Jewish woman that lives in this neighborhood with this, and that's a segment, because there's enough of us now that it's worth us to advertise and to work with this segment. And then it's so it's harder to sort of get a global feeling for this, but there's also an N equals how much, that if you've got fashion associates, I think is the term you use. If you've got, you know, 500 fashion associates, what's the end value to 500? And it's probably 129. If you can get the responses from 129 people in a smartly built, quick analysis questionnaire, you might be able to get a profile that you can rely on, you know, for the coming years and revisit it every 3 or 4 years type of thing. But you have to know your learners for sure. They are adults, even if they're, I don't know what the age average is, but you know, we're adults as of 17, 18. Our brain is now functioning differently than it was when we were 11, 12, 13. All right, we have about an hour to go. And I will not run through this because I do not like doing that, but we're going to start getting to sort of the last portion of this, which is learning, which is looking at things that we're already doing and maybe seeing if we can take some additional takeaways to things that we're already doing. So we're going to go through what the steps are to build performance-based training. The idea of performance-based is that you are capable of measuring an impact. We're good. That's only level 4 of Kirkpatrick. We're not going to talk about ROI, although there are probably some programs, you know, that you deliver that you might say, you know, I'd like to maybe validate what the ROI of this program is. We're going to look at the following steps. So analyze the project needs, which is business alignment. We're not going to look at that. We've spoken about it already. There is an interesting book that I did not put up there. For those of you that really want to go the extra mile, you might consider this book. Okay, it's an introduction to the topic. It really will go through thinking about how do you align your programs to the business. So it's really
Can you show it again?
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't see it.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay. 6 disciplines. Yeah.
So it's another staple. There are other books that have come out, but it's another staple, walks you through the 6 steps. And you can see that the very first step here is called define. This is the why we're doing it, you know? So if you want to go that extra sort of step, you could read that. I wouldn't read it first. I would really suggest you read like 2 or 3 other ones that I showed you first, and then maybe move into that afterwards. We'll look at analysis and understanding learning gaps, how to write objectives, define a program outline, which may or may not be done currently. This is a very critical step, again, when we're thinking about aligning, you know, predicting the training to what the performance objectives should be. This step 4 becomes really important. Writing the design documents, storyboarding, and eventually creating the course. We're not really going to go into these 2 here because, like I said, we're It's not the purpose of this training, but we'll go through the first 6 steps that are here. You'll notice at the top of the screen where this red bar is, you'll start to see the steps in order as we move through them. So this would be the pre-analysis phase. So this is where Emily, in our example before, was just sent something and say, you know, you got to put this course online now. It's a 100 PowerPoint slide deck. Blah, 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 blah. What I'm going to bring up on screen are the questions that what you see, what's on screen here is called the Frank Boyd Star of Analysis. Okay, it's kind of a crappy name. Frank Boyd was a, how do you say, a professor at Concordia University in the educational technology department. He devised one of the foundational processes to do a pre-analysis and into analysis. So I'm going to bring all of these up on screen, and you can see they're not so much in a particular order. But if you look through them, you say, this is the why we're doing this, the what we're doing, the where, the with who, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which one do you believe is going to be the longest to take? Or perhaps longest is not the right word. Let's say the most complex. And certainly the most critical.
The content.
I think it's the learners.
Anybody else? Okay, so there's no right answer. They're all important. The purpose, again, we come back to this. This is what's going to help you define your learning objectives. You really need, I'm going to show you an actual design analysis document that we use, okay? These would be the questions of that why. Why are we creating this training? What are the key messages? Are there any specific aspects you want to make sure are demonstrated? Will this training fit within another training? So how is it strategically positioned? What is the shelf life? Talk to me about scenarios. You're the SME. Can I use some? What should be relevant? Which would be legal to use? What do you want them to be able to do by the end? Is there anything specific? And you go through these questions and you can build upon these. And I can send you these documents if you want, for sure. But the idea of the purpose is to really nail down why you're doing this training so that you can predict it once again. You know, that is one of the words that you should be walking away with as well. Can I predict this training? Otherwise, every time you're going to build training, it's going to become like a one-off. Whereas in your career of designing training, you should slowly but surely, you're probably already there for the most part, but is at least being able to say, if I'm doing, you know, a half hour, what would make sense? You know, what would be the threshold for training nowadays? I'm sure that's, you know, some of you there can tell me, what's the threshold for training duration online?
Oh, for me, I like the max for me is like 15 minutes.
Okay, that's rather short, but yeah, it's absolutely that depends on what your schedule is like and all of that, how hectic your life is. So Leslie,
Say 20 to 30 minutes,
20
like
to
for
30? Yeah, sure. Maybe up to 40. Sometimes you say, well, you know, a lot of content. Can't divide it up into 2 trainings. We don't have that opportunity. Although 2 times 20 would be better than 1 times 4. But you understand that when I started Studio 7 20 years ago, you know, it's still a 4-hour training online. And then we didn't have any tools back then. So it was basically PowerPoint had a few plugins and you tried to figure that out. Today, it's like, no, make it highly interactive, highly engaging. It's got to be 20 minutes or less. Right. And that makes sense because of so many factors that come and play inside of it. So that purpose, you need to be able to understand, to be predicting your training now. Based on the content, based on the availability, based on everything else that you see on screen here. Where, you know, what's the technology, when, what time they're going to be following it. Who are the collaborators? Who are my SMEs? What's the approval chain inside of here? You know, Susanna and Julie can testify to this. When we worked on their projects, which we're still working on now, one of the questions, I have my little paper here that when I'm estimating a project or evaluating it, who's going to be the approval here? How many cooks are in the kitchen at this point? Because man, the more SMEs and the more people have to validate. Well, we'd like to have our training by I don't know, in 6 weeks from now. How many approvers do you have? 9. Yeah. We'll give it to you in 9 months. You know, somebody's got to give me the final okay. Because sometimes we receive the content back and there's still comments in it. You know, hey, Susanna, what do you think about this idea? And then we receive it. What does Susanna think about this idea? I don't know. I got to send it back to you, you know? So all of these things become super important. And if anybody, and Julie or Susanna, you can make the call. If you want me to send you the documents that we use to do our pre-analysis and even our analysis, I'll send them to you. They'll allow you to formulate and think about the questions. You know, what is the wow factor? If my audience is I don't know, 18 to 21, I might want to go heavy on video, for example, you know, or on animations or something like that. You know, Canadians consume over 50 hours of video, just video, YouTube and social media, way over 50 hours a month. At this point, it's probably closer to 100. Who are your learners? You know, that might be an interesting thing to show here. If I have got the location needs with who, learning principles, wow factor, how. Oh, strange. Maybe I skipped it. Oh, here it is. No. Okay. Oh, yeah, here it is. So what do I need to know about the audience for the training to work? What do they need to value? Any top-down support? Okay, so I maybe this is the wrong document. Anyway, I'll find it. I'll find the one that's got all of these elements into it. So this is pre-analysis, and this is a super important phase because it really is here that you decide, is the project doable within the constraints that are being imposed? Whether it's the timelines, the budgets, the people available, the time of the year, it's the summer, no, blah, blah, blah. And this will allow you to move forward into the next sections. Any questions? All right. Let's move on to this here. I always enjoy this one. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms again. Hold on a second. I didn't skip over this so much, but I don't think that this is really important. So the question, not that it's important, but I think you understand the idea of the analysis phase. The question that we ask here is why, which is the content and learning gaps, which is determining, not doing the pre-analysis, but actually moving into analysis. The analysis phase is where you are gathering all of the content, where you're doing the triage, and you're creating that advanced organizer, which is what that mind mapping the IOA rather that I showed you before. And I'm just going to come back because we've already talked about this briefly, but why is doing content analysis difficult? And we've said it already 20 times, so that's why I don't want to rehash it too long. As the instructional designers, why is content and defining the learning gaps? Because you have to define the learning gaps before you do the learning objectives. What are people not doing? What do they need to learn? Then I'll design my learning objectives. Why is it tough? Well, the first thing we said that everybody said was that we have too much content. Right? We have way too much content. That's why it's difficult. What else?
The time to do it in.
What's that?
The time to do it in.
Yeah.
How to break it down.
What your delay is to get it done, for sure. But if I think about it from the side of the person who's designing the training, that's again, I said it before, it's one of the other words that I'd like you to retain from me.
Is it relevancy?
Relevance.
No, we talked about context, relevance, interactivity, but there's another word as an instructional designer that when, like I said, if somebody comes to us and say, we've got a training program, the first thing that pops into our mind is what? They say, you know, we want to do a 40-minute training program. Before I've seen anything, what am I saying?
Why?
Before that, before the why. What's that?
Who are they doing it for?
Before that.
What learning gap are we trying to address?
Even before that.
Okay.
Somebody comes to you, I'll give you the answer away. So they come to you with those 100 slides that are fully loaded. What's the first question you ask yourself?
Is it, who is this for?
Before that.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
What are the key points?
I'm sorry, I heard two answers. Leslie?
Relevant.
What, I was just going to say, what is your time frame? Your deliverables?
Those are in these questions here that I asked for sure. But once you get in, you've got the project now.
Why are they coming to me?
How did I end up with this?
Yeah.
What are you trying, like what gap are you trying to close? What are you trying to teach? Or train?
Yeah.
What are the key points?
The other word that I would like you to retain is predictive.
Say that again.
Predictive. The predictive structure of your training It has to be one of the very first things you say to yourself when you are assigned or you decide to design on your own, whatever the thing is, I want to do a training. What does that equal to? Now, we are actually putting together a demo. It'll take another couple of weeks to put together, but you'll actually be able to go into the demo and click on this and say, well, if I'm doing a 45-minute ILT, how much time do I need to think about it? You know, that type of thing. But as people who design training, their biggest issue is working with content creators, and that content creator can be yourself. So if you don't want to hinder the learning process, and not even talking about budgets, it's how long is a 20-minute module? How many slides are there in a 1-hour ILT? Can anybody tell me that? You're giving an unclass training like I'm doing now. This is a 3.5-hour ILT. How many slides will I actually get through?
60?
70?
I mean,
60, 50, 70, depending on how fast we go, the topics we address, the group and things like that. So that's a 3.5 hours. So if I said to you, you're giving a 1.5 hour instructor-led training to your team, whatever, and you only have 30 slides, you're gonna go, but you'd like to have less, 20 slides, and go much deeper onto the content. So you need to establish that predictive, what makes sense, so that there's more retention. There's less, 5% of, I've only got 5% retention. Move away from that. More interactivity, more engagement, more discussions, I'm facilitating. I'm not teaching, I'm facilitating. Pieces of it are didactic for sure. But do less, in this case, less really will create more. And those are the numbers. That's the starting point. Yes, go ahead, Audrey.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just confused because you say it has to be the first thing, right? The predictive structure, but I just don't see how you can see what makes sense if you don't have the answer to the other questions.
Because you know for sure that anybody that is coming to you to ask you for training will have too much content. You know that going in. So that very first person, where somebody passes by your office or you get an email or something like that, and they say, hey, Audrey, we'd like to have something on workplace harassment. And you say, okay, well, is this online or in person? It'll be online. Instantly lights go off. If it's online, it's got to be maximum 25 minutes. Okay, Martin, how much, where am I getting the content? Well, I've got a slide deck that's 150 slides. Yeah. So what are we talking? Well, we'd like to do it on this 150 slides, but didn't you just say well, I suggested it should be a 20-minute training. Yeah, that's great. We don't have time. 20 minutes is fantastic. And you get my 150 slides through. That's where that process starts to go off. I'm not looking at the content. I don't need to know any of that stuff. I need to be able to work with my, with my SMEs, with my content creators and say, oh, and be able to explain to them, well, why can't you get it? Well, just put it all into the resources. They're not going to read them. Why not? They're going to read them? Because they don't care, because it's not relevant, because there's no impact, because there's no consequences. I mean, everything we've seen so far, the instant reaction is, does the request make sense? And then let me see how I can negotiate this and say, well, Martin, can you identify the most critical pieces in that? Oh, okay. So how many slides should I have? 30. Yes, I'll start with that. And then it just trickles downward after that. All right. I am the time, we're good. I'm going to do my share again. So writing learning objectives. This is the next step. So I've done my pre-analysis. I've got an idea. I'm doing a 25-minute learning module. I've spoken with the SMEs. I've determined my learning gaps. What's the learning gap? Can somebody give me a reasonable learning gap for a training, for your, God, I apologize. I keep forgetting the term you use. Your
Fashion associates?
Yeah, your fashion associates. I apologize. I don't know why that one's not sticking. I'm going to have to make a mnemonic for myself somehow, but give me a reasonable learning gap that you could be addressed by an online training module. Could be very simple. I think we were talking about it in one of the projects we're doing, or maybe the last time we spoke of this, where there's a process to follow when they open the store. I think they turn off, I forget what it is. They turn off the alarm, then they turn the alarm, then they start the cash register, something like that, right? Is that a reasonable? Is that a reasonable learning gap where you say, well, they're not doing it in the right order, for example, or the alarm goes off every whatever, some type of learning gap along those lines? What could it be?
I mean, it could be something around, let's say it's fitting room service. I'm going to use that as an example. In any of the brands, it could be, you know, they open the door, they put the customer in, and nothing else happens. So they're not, therefore, they're not generating a sale out of it, right? Or they're not engaging, right? So
is that a process? Is that a step-by-step process that they should be following? Which is what I'm looking for.
yeah, I mean, yes, there is. Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Okay, so by the end of this learning module, let's not call it that, you will be able to, this is what I want you to write in Teams. So don't give me any answers here, please. I'm going to give you 5 minutes again, or 4 minutes again. I want you to write the learning objectives for a class that would, and it says write 2 learning objectives if that's not, I think you should be able in that time. Remember, we're going to share these afterwards. I'm going to create, let's do a recreate room here. There you go. Let's see what you can come up with, and we'll share the answers in about 4 minutes, okay? Any questions before? Is there any doubt or any questions on what needs to be done? We're good? All right, there we go. Shelley, I think you have to join one of the rooms.
Oh, sorry.
No, no problem.
That was quick.
That was fast.
Too fast.
That was way too fast.
That's okay. Did you manage to write one?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, we're gonna go back in. I'm gonna give you another 3 minutes, okay? We're gonna start this again because it's a particularly important exercise. So I believe the same rooms will be retained, but I'm gonna send you back in for another 3 minutes, okay?
Yeah.
All right, super.
And processes.
Is that better? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'd like us to do now is one person from each group just gives the learning objective and we don't comment on it just yet, okay? So I just want you to read what you've got. Anybody want to start?
We'll go.
Okay.
So at the end of this training, you will be able to explain and describe the fitting room steps and processes to serving your customer.
Okay, super. Thank you. Anybody else?
Can go for our group, I guess. You will be able to follow the steps to deliver the service standard in the fitting rooms. And we were struggling with the words, but to support increased sales, which enable more hours for you.
Okay, last. Anybody else? Last group that hasn't spoken up? There was a last group, right?
I guess I can go for that. You will be able to enhance the customer experience and manage customer objections to build sales.
Okay.
We had a second one. Only if it was in person and in class. I hopefully you'll be proud of us, Edward. I learned something. That if it was in person, that they would be able to actually do the steps and we could evaluate it.
Okay, let's keep all of these objectives in the hopper, okay? We're gonna move forward. We're gonna come back to them in just a moment. Let me be sure. Okay, so a learning objective is meant to describe the essential knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, I'm reading it for you, required by the learners in specific subject areas, usually demonstrated and evaluated at the conclusion of the learning opportunity. Okay, let's start with that. So in other words, what the learner will be able to perform as a result of the learning experience. Now, a performance, the performance objective structure is based on three conditions, three elements: the performance itself, the condition under which the performance can be vetted, and the criteria to match that performance. Number one, as an example. So the performance, something that is accepted as evidence that the learner has met the objective. For example, list the 5 steps to organizing a lunch and learn. So by the end of this module, you will be able to list the 5 steps required to organizing a lunch and learn. Pretty straightforward. I want to enhance my learning objective by adding a condition under which that performance has to take place. So under which the condition the learner must perform it. So using a list of rules, discuss an audit of a customer detail for product X. So now the learner knows that I'm going to, my objective, which is going to be to discuss this, I'll be able to do because I'll have a list of rules that I'll be able to rely on. The first one is only telling me I've got to list the steps. I could have said, you know, using the guidebook, list the 5 steps. I would have enhanced my first one with the condition, the criteria, how well it's going to be performed. With the help of my colleagues, which is my condition, identify, which is my performance, 4 out of the 5 top objectives for product X. Okay. We had something, for example, explains, I believe, Leslie, I don't remember the ending of everything, and it's not important, but we had explain, describe, follow, support sales, enhance, manage, and so forth and so on. If I take explain, can you read that one out to me, please? And I hope you don't mind me using these examples. The objective is for us to learn together.
No, not at all. So we said you will be able to explain and describe.
Okay.
Fitting room steps, and then dot,
Okay.
dot, dot.
So we agreed that this is an online training module. How will you measure if the individual has just followed a half-hour training module is capable of explaining that?
Well, it really is when I just saw your example in terms of list, right? It was that aha one for me, right? Is that we could have said you will be able to list the steps.
Yes,
right?
and yes,
Required for fitting room service, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, which is much easier to do in the context of an e-learning module, is the ability to select the list in order or place them in order or something like that. How can I get the person to describe in the context of a learning program is not possible, right? So that learning objective could not be what? What's that?
It would not be measured.
Measured.
Yeah, validated. Yep.
Measured and validated. You could not actually, your learning objective in no way could be measured in the course of this training module. You could, well, we'll look at something else a little bit later on. We talked about something about manage. There was enhance the customer experience, and then the management of, I think, Shelley, you said that?
Yeah.
Can you repeat one of those or one of them?
You will be able to enhance the customer experience.
How can you prove that in the context of an online training module? You can't even prove it in the context of a face-to-face module of an ILT.
Right.
The only way you can demonstrate that would be back on the store,
Right.
back in the environment, right, in the work environment. And I want to take one from the last group, which was, could somebody from the last group that I didn't mention?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
In many of our, there is a follow-up with the training manager. There's some practical exercises after they're watching the module. Can we build an objective that is at the end once you've completed the learning on
I will show you that.
online plus the
Yes, I will show you that in a moment.
Okay.
There are 3 levels to objectives. Right now, we're addressing the lowest common denominator, which are learning objectives. That's a level up, and I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So who had the last one that I didn't speak to? The other group?
I think that was us.
Can you read one? Can you, if you don't mind?
The first one was follow the steps to deliver the service standard. And so we had that same idea that Julie had, that I guess we were assuming that the practical piece would have come into play as well.
Okay. But you understand in the context, this is why we call them learning objectives, right? So what you're foreseeing is where else they're going to be applying this and how they're else going to apply this. But when you're writing a learning objective for any module, workshop, whatever it is, you need to stay within the context of that learning asset. You can't start thinking, you know, well, we'll come to that in a second. So you understand the idea, right? You're writing learning objectives. They have to be relevant, measurable, specific to that learning event. Now, the good news, oh, I don't have it inside of here. The good news is that nobody said you'll be able to understand, right? You cannot measure understanding. So you should never write a learning objective that starts with, by the end of this, you'll be able to understand. You can't measure understanding. Understanding is measured by using some type of performance objective that's going to say you'll be able to list under these conditions with this criteria. So I'm going to come back to this because we're going to move to I'm actually doing this a little bit out of order, which I love. It's right here. This is Bloom's taxonomy. Again, show of hands. Who's heard of that? Okay. can somebody tell me in a nutshell what Bloom's taxonomy what it is? Anybody that put their hand up? You might not know, and it's okay. I'll explain it myself. So.
I mean, basically, you start by like you're building on your learning, and you need to remember before you understand. You need to understand before you apply. You need to apply before you analyze, et cetera,
Yes.
et cetera.
Very good. So it's a structured curriculum, right? So it's telling you exactly what Pam said, is that if you want to be able to understand something, you must have remembered it first. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to understand it, which is clear. Applying it is the same way. It is usually agreed upon that you should know the first levels of Bloom's taxonomy before moving up into the other ones. And they also help us create learning objectives. I'm going to just click on 3 of these examples here. What I want you to retain from this, and I'll actually take this off again. What I want you to retain from this is that the very first thing is, in online and in-class training, you cannot use an application objective. You can't. You cannot ask your learners to demonstrate something in the context of training that actually needs to be vetted back in the store. This is what, of course, I forgot the name. I forget what the name is, performance grids, basically. You know, when you go back into your store and you've got your thing here and you're trying to see, are they doing it properly, blah, 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 right? That's what that's for. I'm back on the store and I'm actually vetting. And even those, you know, especially in your case, these secret shoppers and things like that are really the best people to be able to know, are they doing exactly what you want? Because any other form of intervention will create a biased result, potentially will create a biased result. So everything that you're doing in terms of designing learning objectives cannot go above the second level. And we're going to look at what that looks like, okay? Up to and including the word understand, of course. So if I'm building something, I'm going to take a very dumbed down version just so that it's very clear what I'm trying to express. So we're studying something on apples, okay? So the only thing at the end of this module I want you to be able to do is name 3 common varieties of apples. That is it. I'm not asking you to understand why. I'm not asking you to apply it back on the job. Just name 3 apples. Okay, let me continue, and I'll come back to this. By the end of this module, you'll be able to compare the identifying characteristics of an Empire apple to a Gala. I'm a level up now. And I won't go too far, just stop here, apply. Then here, say, as a question, would apples prevent scurvy, a disease caused by a deficiency in vitamin C? Now I'm applying the knowledge in the sense that I have foundational knowledge. I've learned that apples have vitamin C. I understand that vitamin C deficiency can create scurvy, which we used to have by pirates, right, way back when. All of these things. When you are building your training, it is okay for you to say, I'm only going to bring them to the remembering level. Who can remind me of the number that we said before?
3213.
Very good. That's all I want you in this context of this module. It's going to be a 10-minute module. And all I want you to remember are what the steps are to customer service in the changing room, whatever was mentioned before. I'm not saying I'm not going to train you further, but this module is just going to help you remember what the steps are. I'm not going to build it into 17 other things. And then you know what? I'm going to maybe ping you, or maybe your store manager is going to come by and say, hey, what are the 7 steps again? Oh yeah, good job. That's it. And then maybe a week later, I'm going to build a second training and help you understand why I taught you this. And we're going to go into understanding and so forth and so on. You don't need to bring your learners straight up to application, especially if you're leveling playing fields and it's a particularly difficult concept. And so you're saying, well, you know what? I want to get into understanding right now. Yes, they're learners. Yes, they need to know why. I'll give you as much as I can around that. But this module, we're going to make it into a fun game. And I'll give you an example. If I gave this to you before, please let me know. But we were working with a pharmaceutical company on a product that was for people who had cystic fibrosis. And that's a pump. There's a pod haler, they called it. You have to shake it, crack it to open it up, and then pump. Well, they realized that the people that were using this were not shaking it long enough. So now they already knew how to apply it. They already understood why they needed to take it. I wasn't going to devise a training that needed to go that high. I was going to devise a 10-minute game to get them to remember shake, crack, bump, shake, crack, bump, shake, crack, bump, shake, crack, bump. That's all. That is all. I don't need to go in further. It didn't cost $1 million to put together, and just a training, repeat, 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 whatever, however you want to build it. So the relevance of your learning objectives, and this all ties back into your analysis. And, I've got these 100 slides. What can I do now? Quick win. Just get them to remember this. It's a policy. More to come. Strategically, your manager will speak to you about it, so forth and so on. And this allows you, and I think I even specified this the last time, it allows you to dumb down is not the right word so much, but in a sense, dumb down the learning activities, the learning events, so that you can even have some that are informational. So that if you're just building an information model, you're saying, we're not really going to evaluate at the end of this, then it's informational. And go into the design of this training with the idea that it's going to be an information training. And what are the best cases? There might not be a lot of retention, but I need to expose them to it. And then we'll have a training that'll only be about remembering 3, 2, 1, 3, 1, 9, 2, and then you do move forward like that. Even if you can't have this super massive strategy, at least you're building upon prior knowledge, you're creating that prior knowledge, and you're giving opportunity to some notions and concepts where you say, they're really not grasping this. Maybe they don't remember it. Maybe we bombarded them and they can't even remember what the steps are. Let's do a training just on the steps, and then we'll make a fun game out of it. And see if like I was saying, the manager can nudge them and say, hey, you remember what the 7 steps are? Good job. Take an extra 5 minutes on your break, that type of thing. All of this lends for informal, conversational, fun training. And that's what goes when it comes to retention and application and so forth. Are there any questions before I rebroadcast? Did I shake anybody up? Okay. So if you Google measurable learning objectives, you will come up with this and more. I took some pieces out of here, but it's pretty straightforward. And you can say to yourself, well, let's see down here in the straight up list, identify. You'll see some that will overlap because you can use some in different one, but I'm not going to say illustrate. I'm not going to say execute, demonstrate. I'm not going to say that down here because I can't do it in the context of learning. This is going to be on the job. When we'll build the competency profiles, that's what I was looking for. We'll build the competency profiles to see if the individuals can actually map out, are you doing them properly? Because application happens on the job. So anytime you say, explain, well, you could actually have that as a level 2 potentially. I've understood it, I can explain it. I'm not applying it yet, but I'll explain it in this context here. I might say, well, Susanna, explain to me what context means. Okay, you can do it, very good. Level 2 has been matched. But what do I want to do back on the job? I don't know. I wouldn't have been able to say here, you will be able to implement instructional design methodology. I'm not going to be there to see if you're going to apply any of this stuff that we learned. So I won't bring it that far. So remember that performance condition criteria. You've also heard, I'm sure, of like SMART objectives and all of these types of things. Those have different uses. SMART objectives tend to be more driven towards performance. This really are learning objectives structures. Now, to come back to what Julie was saying, I feel very didactic now. There are no questions. I feel like asking somebody a question. No? Okay.
I do have a question, Edward. In this example, it could be as simple as listing the steps to deliver the service standard, right? Is that okay? Because you had asked us to do 2. So is it acceptable to just have one simple learning objective?
Absolutely. The more learning objectives you put into a training, the more content you're going to have. Yeah. So you end up 3 would be the very top end of any training, unless it's a training program, which you will have. And I'll come to that in a second. But yeah, you don't really want to go much beyond 2 or 3. Now, you'll see it in some of the work that we've done. And sometimes, customer's always right kind of situation. And this is the way we do it. And so that paradigm is still sort of changing. More learning objectives, more sections, more content, longer duration, and so forth and so on. So at the go ahead, Shelley.
I was going to say, I guess, like if you're but to Angela's point, if you say, okay, the first thing we want is you to be able to list the customer service steps, right? And that's your brief module. And then when you're trying to get that remembering piece and get to sort of an understanding, you would be doing the practice potentially in the store with whoever.
A fun way.
Right, like a fun little game, or you could do try-on sessions, let's say, and you practice this, and then you could come back if you felt that there was a second learning objective, maybe, and then expand upon.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the strategy. You are reinforcing. I'll come to you in a second, Susanna.
So then you could. So I guess, like you said, if you had that reinforcement piece, and then you said, okay, after you finish this training, this module. Right. And you could say as a team, okay, 3 weeks after they finish this module, we're going to push that it's time for them to take the second module per se.
Would depend. You could sort of set it in time in that sense. It kind of comes back to, is it this one here? It comes back to a little bit of of this here. Right. Your levels of evaluation become important, because if you're building upon previous, 3 weeks may or may not be a long time if nothing has happened between the two.
Right.
So that's the only thing you need to consider. I remember in one case, I think we were doing this for Napa, for Napa Auto Parts, and we had built this very similar list, just understanding. And in the mechanics room, they don't call them mechanics anymore. I think they call them technicians now. In the technicians room, they had these 7 or 8 step process, very, very process oriented. And the store owner would come in and we'd mix them all up. And then he would wait to see if anybody notices it. And then somebody would notice and go back and put his, and then put a little check mark that, Martin is the one who read it. And then he'd pass by it and he'd mix them all up again. And all he was getting the people to do was to remember through a very simple activity that people had to, how many times had he done it, and how many times had it successfully been reestablished? Yes, Susanna.
I think this just goes back to, again, it reinforces just like the shift that we need to make in the organization, in that delivering a training is only like the bits of pieces of information that you need to give. That's why sometimes our objectives today include show me, tell me, demonstrate, and then our training becomes hours and hours long, and we think we're done, we're finished. But
it's tactical and not strategical.
Well, it was eye-opening for me, because I went through all of this already, and with Audrey and all that, when we were in the, I'm like, no, he's not going to let us do an application one. Don't put one down. I said, he's going to challenge us. Because I've been through it, and you think it can happen, but after that training, it's like, what do you want them to do? So it's definitely something we need to work on.
It forces you to be strategic, because if you really want them to apply, you got to intervene on the job.
Yes.
Otherwise, all you're giving is level 1 and 2. At best is understanding. Yes, Julie.
Well, I guess I'm definitely going the same direction. I think we have the overall objective for the initiative.
Yes.
And then we have the training objectives. What we need to make sure that we're clear with our clients, or with the people who are asking us, is that this is just going to solve part of it. And just by the way, this is the scope of your objective. Pretend that the overall objective is going to be achieved through this short e-learning or training portion.
Yeah.
Be complete. It's
yeah.
More complete experience.
And I will show you what you're coming to as well on the next slide. We're going to accelerate a little bit. Yes, Shelley?
Okay. No, I was just going to say, it sort of ties into the fact that maybe as part of what we do, if we're changing sort of the paradigm for our stores, is going back to situational leadership for the management team, where we recognize that the different levels of learning, and that it's not tell someone what to do and then then all of a sudden they're a D4, and you don't do any of this follow-up in between. So I think that might also be the key with our management teams to grow this learning experience and training experience in our stores.
Like I said, it definitely forces you to be strategical, because you come to realize that what you're doing cannot actually match what the expectation is. Again, you know, those two first boxes, you know, the information and resources, they're not up to speed. And this is typical. This is not new. I mean, it's a very lengthy process generally to implement. Christy, we'll take a last question.
Yeah, it was just actually just a real quick comment. And I think sometimes what happens is when we're building something, and it even happened in our group where we were kind of back and forth, and Pam was visionary for sure for us. So thank you, Pam. But it was almost about the lines being blurred about what's in it for us, what do we want to get, and what is it, what's in it for them. So
Yeah.
I think there was like some blurred lines there. So I think it just helped to provide clarity. And I think that often happens with anything that we can deliver sometimes, whether it's a policy or whatever, like we know what the end result needs to be for the organization, but sometimes we forget that it needs to be what they're going to get.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you've taken 20 things away from this discussion or 10 things, see if you can implement only one of them.
Mm-hmm.
One will build on two, which will build on three, you know, and see which are the most critical or the ones that are the low hanging fruit, and see what you can do there. You know, these types of I mean, I won't even say realization. I think that everybody here has had this in the back of their mind, and sometimes it's just putting words to things that we already know. But the paradigm shift could take years to happen. You know, there's a lot of people, to talk to. There's a lot of, you know, apprehension. You say, well, we've always been doing an information dump. Yeah, let's try something different. All the research is there, you know, it's all there. Everybody does, you know, I mean, it's all available to everybody. And doing it is not any harder or any more costly. It's not more costly to do. I often say this, you know, people say, what do you guys do differently? What does Studio 7 do differently than your competitors? Well, without belittling our competitors, we just follow the recipe. A lot of people don't follow the recipe, and the recipe's out there for everybody, you know. We have our own brand. I mean, we have our special sauce in our hamburgers, but it's essentially a recipe. So we have about 15-20 minutes left. I still have 5 slides that I'd like to look at, which is remember we're at the level 3 at the part 3, which is learning objectives, or the learning gaps in the learning objectives. So to come back to what Julie was asking, there are 3 types of learning objectives. So of objectives, I should say. So what we just looked at were the learning outcomes at the bottom here, but there are program goals, course objectives, and learning outcomes. So program goals, broad statements of what the program intends to accomplish. This would be something like, you know, at the end of this, sales reps will be competent in critical questioning and objection handling. When I took my grad or my undergrad, you know, they say, you'll be an instructional designer and you'll be able to do this. And it's a 2-year course. That's my program goal. So yes, you could actually say you'll be able to understand what the right processes are to designing training. It's going to be a program goal. Fine. I'm not going to measure that. I'll be measured through various exams, but these exams will be course exams and learning objectives, right? Course objective describes the content that will be covered in a course. So in my grad, one of the courses is learning theories. It's 15 weeks from September to December. And the course objective for that would be, for example, we will validate our understanding of the importance of compliance, or, you know, we'll understand the various discrepancies between learning styles and people. Fine, it's a 15-week course, 45 hours, whatever. Down to what we'll be able to do as a result of engaging in a learning process, discuss, blah, 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 depending on where I want to go in Bloom's taxonomy. All right. The next step, you've got your learning objectives, you've looked at your learning plans. This should not be here. You've looked at the learning objective, you've written the learning objectives. What you want to do now is create your program outline. And I mentioned that before that, establishing a program outline is not something that a lot of people do. And it's something that we started implementing only about 5 or 6 years ago. We actually weren't doing it initially until we realized how much this step is critical. Every learning asset you do should actually have a program outline. Okay, so it'll have the content and the pedagogical treatment. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I'm actually going to show you one. So this is a program outline for, I think it's Herbie Rail. Why aren't you opening up? That's very interesting. Let me try it again. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be opening up. I'm going to just try and grab it from the server. Just take a moment. See if this one works. Okay, I have no idea. for some reason Word isn't launching, but essentially what you're going to see is that it will be a step-by-step Word, it'll be a Word document of maybe a page and a half. And Susanna and Julie, you might remember this. When we received all of your content and we gleaned through it, we come back to you and we present to you what we believe the course will look like. And it'll say it's divided up into 4 sections, section 0, section 1, section 2, and the conclusion. We think that section 0 will have this type of content and might be this type of pedagogical treatment. And then section 1 will talk about this, and we're going to use these interactions. It's a very high, it's like a course outline that you want to design up front. And the reason for this is because when you're going back to your SMEs and your content creators and all of that, you want to tell them, well, look, 25 slides, 30 slides, 4 sections. The core of it is this content. Can you tell me? And I love this, especially with you, Susanna, and forgive me for taking the example, but I thought it was so good. We had a huge discussion following the presentation that we did for DOR, because the instructional designer that presented you the outline added all of the content that we gathered and would just really wanted to focus on up here. And I remember you and your team were like this, looking at this saying, why the hell are you showing us all of this? You know, and I went to the instructional designer afterwards and I said, listen, your program outline is not about including everything they've provided to us. It's about gleaning the essentials from there and saying, this is what the program structure looks like. And that's helps you work with your content creators to say, am I forgetting anything? And did I, you know what, maybe there's one here that I can't show you. Maybe I can launch this one if it's not a, I think it's worth it. If I go into our internal projects.
I have one open for Omni, if you want me to share that one.
Yeah, sure. If you, yeah, sure. Go ahead. You can take, I'll stop the, you can take the share.
Okay. I know there's 2. There's one that was simple. This one?
Yeah, anyone is fine. So basically, as you can see, this one is a particularly long one. More because not so much long. The first page of this document basically has more logistical information that we put in when we're managing the project. So we're not so much looking at this, but it does have the learning objectives and things like that. But if you go down, this is what we submitted back to Susanna and Julie to say, well, section 0, this is the content of everything that we've gleaned from you. There's this. Now we will even make comments here and say, listen, this content should not be here. We believe this content needs to be removed from this training as it does not match the learning objective and things like that, you know? So it's a really great way to say this course is going to last this long, have this many sections, and this is the way we think that we're going to treat the content, whether it's online or in person. And this document is bounced back and forth with the subject matter experts as many times as are required until everybody all agrees and say, yep, everything that I want to talk about is in there. The content's not all there, but the topics are there. And if you scroll down just a tad again, Susanna, if you don't mind, I want to see, like, look at the pedagogical treatment for section 1. The Omni diagram will be displayed on screen. Learners will click and reveal the definitions for each of the elements of the Omni model. So we're already telling, you know, the SMEs, this is how we envision. It's not perfectly accurate and things will change, but this is how we envision the users interacting with the content at this stage. And then they can come back, like Susanna might have come back and said, well, you know what, we like this idea, but could we also embed, you know, a glossary, for example, or anything along those lines, right? This becomes our document to structure the course before I start designing it. And it is a fantastic way. We use this in conjunction with our mind mapping. And then we say, you know what, your course is 3 sections, perfect. And section 0 is usually just the administrative poutine, why we're here, the learning objectives, maybe a word from you know, some, you know, opinion leader, president, whatever it is. And then let's get into the content. Okay, thank you, Susanna.
No problem.
Any questions on that? Okay, so I'll go through to this. No, I don't want to go on to this. We'll just let's move on to a different thing here. The next step is creating the design document itself. Now, the design document is the phase that's going to come in just before the storyboard. Now, this is true if we're building an interactive module like Storyline or Camtasia or something like that. If we're building Rise or if we're building an ILT, we're not going to have, we'll have a design document in a sense, but it'll be adapted to that technology. This is very much for something that is being scripted. So it's going to have the performance objectives in it, the screen, like I've got the screen number, the title, the content that's going to appear on screen is going to be here, the script or the notes, which will be under here, the script, which is here, the interactivity, which is going to come down inside of here, the exercises, if that's the case, you know, if it's going to be an exercise, it'll have that, or an assessment, the visual treatments, and the duration of each. Now, depending on who we work with, we may not go that deep into the content, into designing a document like that. As our relationships grow with some of our customers, some of these things are taken out, like the visuals on screen. We don't always put them in the design documents. We might already start storyboarding right on the side. So hopefully this is going to work. There you go. Because this seems to be a huge one. Okay. So here's an example of something that we did for Via Rail. I've put a lot of X's here just because we're recording this. I don't want the terminology necessarily to come up. But basically, this would have been a cover slide, which in this case is for Blue Flag, and there was probably nothing on this course, on this one. But sometimes you would have something like, welcome to this training on, the duration of this course is 10 minutes. Then we get into, welcome to this e-learning module on XXX procedures for instructions on how to navigate. So we're in section 0, and this becomes our design document. This becomes a document that is, a good analogy is to say it's our house blueprint. This is the one where you say, man, I got to nail that blueprint down, because once I start building the house, renovating or deconstructing is a lot longer to do than getting the blueprint right. Doesn't mean that I can't change the color of a room or maybe add some wallpaper afterwards, but I don't want to add a room on, you know, once I've done this. So the person will read through this, the SMEs will read through this very much like a book. The purpose of this policies, and by extension the course, is to educate you on blah, 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 blah. And it's just going to go down. You can see explain, describe, identify, list, blah, blah. And it's read very, very easily. This becomes the narration script, which will then be pulled out. And I'm going to try to see if I can grab this here. It's very funny. There. This is now the storyboard for this particular project. You know, which it's actually not for this project, but I couldn't find it ready hand. But this becomes a storyboard. So I can then vet this as well. And we identified which images we're going to purchase, which content is going to appear on screen. And you'll see there are very few full sentences. It's mostly icons, images, you know, lots of images, and this will all be synchronized to the narration. What the exercises are, these, I guess this is there's got to be one in here somewhere. Permanent hearing loss. I don't know where they are. Eventually, we're going to come into choosing some, how do you say, having some interactions and some things like that. So these two documents are designed after the design document is finalized and all the SMEs sign off. Now, this document should not be rotating 100 times. This is where it gets very dangerous to come into scope explosion, because we didn't think about the right people to include at the beginning. That question in the analysis phase or pre-analysis that says who's involved in this, really, really important, because that's the type of situation where you finish building the training, somebody comes in and says, well, we don't like the word box, we want to use the word carton. Can you make the change? It's only one word. Yeah, it's going to take us 45 hours to change that word. Literally 45 hours. We have to redo everything. We've got to redo the narration, redo all the scripting, redo all of the synchronization. It's huge. I just want to come back to this. If I can come back, there you go. So when the last couple of things I want to talk about here is just when you're creating the storyboard, which is this, it's essentially the same idea as building for a movie. That's what you want to keep in mind. You're storyboarding like they do in movies, you know, that often the ending is shot before the beginning has started and things like that. So you want to keep a lot of these things in mind. So that storyboard becomes a very efficient tool for you. And so does the design document. Now, these two, in terms of like an ILT like we're doing now, or a VILT like we're doing now, there's no design document. I don't need one, but I do have my speaker notes. I don't have any, I don't need any, but you can build speaker notes in, which becomes sort of your design document, and you're working right inside of that file. But the design outline is created for every project. We're doing an internal demo right now I had my instructional designers, they said, well, you want us to start building it? I said, no, send me the outlines. You want an outline? Yeah, I want to be sure you're capturing everything I want to say. Otherwise, you're going to keep going back and you're going to keep writing. So it's super, super efficient as a methodology. That's pretty much it in terms of the review of all of the content that I wanted to show you. The sort of the key takeaways in terms of visual design, just for the storyboard portion of it again. So when you're designing your training, so make sure that your content is legible, mobile friendly in some cases. I know that you guys do a lot of mobility training, or at the very least on iPads. Powerful, high quality imagery, no eye candy, like I've said before. Embed rich media, use videos and things like that. Increase the frequency of visual change. So anybody that followed the facilitation course will have noticed that there's a lot of visual change, because it keeps it's the how do you say, the attention reset button, right? Bring it back, bring back the individual. So use visual cues. So there's a lot of documentation online around this specifically. It came out probably about 15 years ago that'll explain things like, if you're putting an image on screen, where should I position the text? It really gets that granular. What type of visual should I use? If I'm scrolling, how should the content follow? There's a lot of documentation around the design of a storyboard that might be relevant for you if you're interested. Keep single ideas per slide as much as possible. Have a couple of more slides if you need to, but don't try and address 7 different topics on the same slide. It'll be a cognitive overload. Clear titles, single ideas again, and of course, consistent branding. When it comes to branding, when it comes to designing training, the visual aspect, the quality of the visual aspect is just as important as the content itself. If it's ugly, or if it's displeasing in some way, it won't sustain the attention of your learners for sure. So, sort of to finish this up, I just wanted to look at this last thing. So the last slide the before last slide that I want to talk about is, the idea is that content is king, but context is God. So the idea is always keep those 3 or 4 words in mind. So if I come back to that, actually, before I do, found a few learning tricks. I'll give you a second just to read this. Please put your hand up when you've read through it. We're good? Okay, super. And this, which we didn't touch on much, but I suggest that you look up adult learning online. If you're not familiar with adult learning principles, just do a quick search. Like, there'll be a top 10, top 7, top 12 on adult learning principles, because this again ties back to everything we've learned. You're talking to adults. You're addressing yourselves to adults. So limited time, need feedback, self-directed, learn by doing, things like that. So you can do a quick search for that. So to finish off the session, I just wanted to ask you, can anybody share 1 or 2 key takeaways that they say, well, you know what, maybe this is some interesting stuff that was covered during the workshop. Anybody want to share that?
For me, it's the importance of the pre-analysis and going back to that grid that you have when you had the environment and the individual and all that kind of, making sure you have reviewed all of that before you start putting anything on paper.
Yeah. And I will send that document, Julie. I saw your note. I will send it to you. It's a really good, now, like I said, it's you have that evolve based on what your needs are, but it's a really good starting point. And to that point, what's the additional word that we've tacked on to this training?
Predictive structure. Yeah.
It's very, very, very important to remember. Somebody's asking for training. Yeah, well, okay, well, it's going to be 30 minutes. Bang. those numbers that structure needs to come to mind to be able to say, I need to manage my content, manage my SME, manage the that's not going to work if you don't have a predictive nature. This is where it gets out of control. It's like, I got 140 slides. Well, if you want to hinder the learning experience, let's do them all. Not to mention, it's going to take 9 years to put together. Anybody else want to share?
I think just the learning objective piece, when you really clean, like for me, it kind of like eliminated some clutter by putting it into performance conditions and criteria. I think that I had to really think about that, and I got caught on that a little bit. So but it allowed me to, really even reflect onto what we're working on right now and be like, okay, we still have some clutter that we need to, less is more, and go back to it. So
and a great way to remember that is to create another mnemonic. So if you're saying you're teaching about a recipe, you could say, well, by the end of the module, you'll be able to, using the recipe book, you'll be able to list 4 out of the 5 ingredients required to make lasagna. You have them there, performance condition criteria. Just keep that as a mnemonic. I'm not saying that you're always going to apply those, but man, if you can, maybe just performance and condition would already be it would be great. But for the person who's designing it, it already sets that your passing grade is 80%, right? You don't even ask the question, what's my passing grade? Well, it's 4 to 5, Any last comments before we sojourn? Well, okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're 2 minutes past the hour, but I hope that the class was at least, provided a little bit more substance. I've suggested a few books, but please reach out to me at any time if you want. It'll be a pleasure to discuss if there's anything else that you want to chat, instructional design.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Very welcome.
Very,
Thank
very
you.
good. Thank you.
Really,
Thank you.
time well spent.
I will send you the link, Julie, to the YouTube video once it's up, as well as the pre-analysis document.
And if you develop another session for your good clients, for sure, we're interested.
Oh, I have one on Zoom. I have one on how to use Zoom, but you guys don't use Zoom. I think you use Teams, right?
No, really.
I'll let you know. I'm actually designing a full instructional design course. It's 24 hours. It's a big course, but there has been so much demand for these courses, and I don't have time to go in depth into it. So it's going to be a 24-hour course delivered over 8 weeks, 3 hours per week type of thing, and it's going to be fully packed, but it won't be ready probably until the end of the year. But that's where I'm headed right now.
Well, put me on your distribution list.
You got it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have a good
you.
afternoon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.